His name was Duke Frazier, of Duke Frazier Productions.
Howdy, folks. This is Duke Frazier.
I know who you are. You're the same dumb pilgrim I've been hearing for 20 days and smelling for 3.
And they say he wanted to be a historian. Story goes that he was a man of proper wit, adventurous spirit, suited to the mountains. Nobody knows where he come from, and don't seem to matter much. He was a young man. Ghostly stories about the tall hills didn't scare him none. He was looking for a Hawken gun, the more original the better. He settled for an Invest Arms, but it was at least a shootable Hawken. You couldn't go no better. Bought a horse, traps, other truck that went with being a mountain man. Said goodbye to that life down in Colorado. This here's his story.
The way that you wander is the way that you choose. The day that you tarry is the day that you lose. Sunshine or thunder, a man will always wonder where the fair wind blows. Jeremiah Johnson made his way into the mountains. He was betting on forgetting all the troubles that he knew.
Heap of fat meat can't shine forever. I seen it coming. People shine again, Henry.
Actually, it seems reasonable that if there's no...
Don't you know nothing? Self, made out of worms.
Hello, everybody. We're back. I'm sorry I had to do that intro that way, but you know what? I enjoyed it so much. I played it like 4 times. Anyway, we are here tonight with Duke Frazier, our historian here on my right. If you guys haven't checked him out, which I know almost all of you have, Duke Frazier of Duke Frazier Productions. Tonight we are doing, by special request, the Mountain Man era. And so I'm just going to basically be over here reading your comments. If you write a comment, we don't get to it right away. Don't worry. I will read all the comments. We'll stop every 10 or 15 minutes. I'll read the comments. And any questions you guys have for Duke, anything like that, go ahead and get them out there. And like I said, I'm just basically, the way we do these particular history shows, I just turn it over to him and let him go. But why don't we start out, Duke, with why don't you tell them why you have a little bit of experience and expertise in this area, what you've done, you know, as far as historically to this time period.
Yeah, because I used to work down at Bent's Fort in southeastern Colorado, and that's a fur trading fort way down there. That was put up by William Bent in 1833 thereabouts. Caught the latter days of the beaver trade, but that's where I gained most of my fur trade knowledge. Of course, the interest all got started with Jeremiah Johnson and the Mountain Man.
Okay, so let's get that out right off the bat. Jeremiah Johnson or the Mountain Men? Which one's your favorite? Are you still there?
Oh, you're asking me. I thought you was asking the audience.
No, I was asking you.
I'd have to go with Mountain Men.
Pretty historically accurate. In a lot of ways.
Well, a little bit more so than Jeremiah Johnson.
Yeah.
They get the rendezvous part right because it's supposed to be depicting the last rendezvous. They do use flintlocks, but they also got quite a few Thompson Center Hawkens in there.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, at least they're portraying towards the end of that fur trade, beaver trade era, part of the fur trade. Whereas Jeremiah Johnson, by the time he got out there in the mountains, the beaver trade was pretty well, not completely dead, but it was pretty well gone. Yeah. It was nowhere near what it was back in the heyday.
Yeah. And the latest reports that I've heard on the history of that is that John Garrison actually didn't get there till about 1860 in reality. So he was more
Liver Eaton Johnson. Yeah, he was really late.
He was more of a wood hawk and a gold miner than he was a fur trapper. But he probably did a little bit of that. Well, anyway,
the only
guys,
reference that I could tie him to is when they say something about up on the Judith. Yeah, he kind of worked up in that area at one point.
We have Stephen M. here. It's good to see you. And we have Gunsmith 4570. The Saboteur 45 was here, but he had to leave. George Washington is in. Hello. And Diane Houston. Let's get started with a question, kind of a statement question here by George Washington. 50 cal as far as a flintlock seems to be the sweet spot for black powder in North America, especially for big bears.
Yeah, I mean, you look historically, and out here in the West, there wasn't a lot smaller than 50. It was 50 and up, so 50 is kind of the minimum. And in some states, it's getting to where you can't even hunt deer with a 50 anymore. They're wanting 54s or bigger.
Yes. Over there in the Museum of Wyoming, which is right next to where you are, there's a guy over there. I can't remember his channel name, but he digs out the actual artifacts of, Wyoming, Montana. And he had a rifle in there that was a 68 caliber rifle. Yeah. And he, according to him, 50 was minimum, 58 was average. And a lot of times you'd see even bigger as far as rifle calibers.
Yep. So 62 was popular with a couple guys that I've kind of tracked around. Because, with the big buffalo, big bears, you got to have something that's sending out a good chunk of lead. So was it Lewis and Clark when they came out? They said they shot a grizzly bear 12 times in the head and never even slowed him.
That's scary.
But yeah, when you look at the skull of a grizzly and realize them little round balls they was throwing at him, them things were just bouncing.
George Washington said we should talk about the leather trade as far as the Midwest is concerned. Leather trade. I maybe meant fur trade. I don't know. Maybe he's talking about the leather trade.
Well, there was deerskin trade. And that was part of the fur trade. But yeah, the Midwest stuff, that's not my forte. It's pretty much Rocky Mountains and West. Mm-hmm. And even that's kind of limited to just the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains.
We will get into that someday as far as the fur trade going on in Minnesota and some of that, because it may not, if Duke doesn't want to, he didn't really study that era, but we will get somebody, even if it's not you. But that is a very interesting time period as far as going back a little earlier. One more thing before we get started here. Diane Houston said, hi, Duke and Garrett. Hi, Diane. And Stephen and Constitutional Carpenter. Hey, he said, evening all. Good evening to you. And Stephen M. said, my favorite mountain man is still Joseph L. Meek.
Oh, yeah, Joe Meek. Yep. The Murray Mountain Man, as he was called. I read the book about him, but it's been a while ago. But he was an interesting character.
Okay, so let's get into this. Most people would start this story in 25 with Ashley. But do you have anything before that? What happens before that?
So, yeah, Lewis and Clark comes through. They note the amount of fur wealth that's in the mountains, but it's real slow coming on. I mean, the War of 1812 kind of turns attentions away, but you do have one group that goes out west, often referred to as Astorians, not historians, Astorians. They come out, they do some beaver trapping, and the Hudson Bay was doing some stuff out there, but it really doesn't catch on until that Ashley crew, when they come through, and the Ashley crew is kind of that spark that really ignites things and gets things going.
Yeah, and we want to talk about some of the people that were in that crew. A lot of stories came out of that. A lot of men, a lot of stories came out of that. Is it true there's 100 guys? Is that the story, 100 guys? Ashley?
Yeah, there's about 100 of them. It was 1823 there. It also ties into the first Indian War west of the Mississippi River for the United States. Because they get up into kind of the southeast South Dakota area on the Missouri River there, And they make camp near an Arikara village. And the Arikara, of course, want to trade guns. And as the story goes, the trappers aren't willing to. And then the next morning, the Arikaras attack. And then that winds up turning into the first Arikara War, which is a discussion for a totally different day. But some guys who were in that were some that gained a lot of fame later on. Jedediah Smith was one of them. Young James Bridger was amongst that crew. Hugh Glass, because shortly after that, Hugh Glass is going to get mauled by a grizzly. And then there was, I always get this guy's name messed up. It's either Edgar or Edward Ross or Rose. It's always because there's another guy that's got the similar name with the same initial, so I get that one screwed up. But probably one of the first black men that we can document as being a trapper out there in the West. James Beckworth takes credit for a lot of stuff that the ER guy did with the Crow Indians, but that's just a handful of the names that are out there. Yeah, Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith, of course, are probably the bigger ones. Then Hugh Glass. And like I said, Glass eventually gets mauled. There's also Fitzgerald. I can't think of his first name, but he's one of the ones that abandons Hugh Glass up there in South Dakota. And if you're imagining that they're in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and all the pine trees, at this point, they're still out on the flat plains. They're on the Missouri River right in the middle of South Dakota. It's open, barren country, some rolling hills. But they weren't really even halfway to the beaver country at that point yet.
When the mauling took place, or when?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I like to a few things, because everybody knows, of course, the movie The Revenant. A few things that struck me wrong even then was I knew that Hugh Glass, whenever he got mauled by that grizzly, he had skin rot, and so he would crawl on a rotten stump, let the maggots eat the rot off of his back. And I was thinking, how in the world did he do them? And some tough maggots to be up there in that wintry weather they showed in that movie. I don't think that was quite accurate.
Yeah, he gets mauled up there about where the town of Lemon, South Dakota is. And it's not spelled like the fruit lemon. It's Lemmon, if I remember right. But yeah, that's kind of the area he gets mauled at. Open country. It's not really, what they are portraying in the movie. But yeah, he gets left there with Jim Bridger, and Jim Bridger's just a young boy. And Fitzgerald. And Fitzgerald gets scared. They're basically waiting for Hugh Glass to die so they can bury him. And Fitzgerald gets scared and says, "Let's go," and takes Hugh Glass's gun and shooting pouch, a couple other personal items, and they take off. And Glass doesn't die. He survives. He crawls back to Fort Kiowa, where about the town of Chamberlain, South Dakota is. And if you look on a map, that's not a short distance. It's a couple hundred miles in between the two locations. Gets back to Fort Kiowa, and then kind of goes out for vengeance. Eventually catches up with Jim Bridger and then realizes, well, he's too damn young. He didn't know what he was doing. And so he forgives Bridger. And then he goes after Fitzgerald. Well, he finds Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald at this point is scouting for the Army. He's joined the Army now, and so if he kills him, he gets hung for treason. So commanding officer that was in charge of him made Fitzgerald give Glass back all of his personal items. So at the end of the day, Glass really didn't take vengeance out on anybody. He did get his personal property back. And then from there, he winds up at Fort Union in North Dakota. And at one point, he winds up down here in the Fort Laramie area, gets in with the Arikara again, almost gets killed, and they ride bull boats down the Platte River to, I forget where it was that they wound up, but then he winds back up at Fort Union, and up at Fort Union, he's going to be killed eventually by the Arikara up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot of people don't understand the desire for the vengeance. It's not so much that they left him for dead as they took his rifle. I think, and he had from my understanding, a really fine Pennsylvania style rifle. And what a lot of people didn't understand was to have a rifle in 1825, even in 1825, to have a rifle was like owning a nice car, a really nice vehicle, because not a lot of people had rifles even at that point. I mean, they were expensive. They were very expensive. And I'll let you go into that. Let's go ahead and talk about guns in the 1820s.
Yeah, because at that time period, they're all still flintlocks. There's a misconception that a lot of them had cap locks, and it's like, no, the percussion cap system was really slow catching on. So most of them are carrying flintlocks, and you could go, to a gunsmith, get a fine rifle made, and it's something that lasts you a long time, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. I mean, it takes about 3 months to make a rifle from scratch, as they were. It's why Hawken rifles were so hard to get a hold of and cost so much money. And a lot of mountain men that did get Hawkens, year or two down the road, they would wind up in debt, and they have to sell that Hawken to satisfy their debt. So they weren't very prominent either. But there's a lot of the Lancaster style rifles. The Kentucky rifles are fairly common.
This is a fairly common rifle. This is Southern Mountain. This is a Kibler gun. This one is way smaller than they would have been carrying, because this is a 36. But if you could imagine this in 45, 50, all the way up to 58, this Southern style, or early 1800 style long rifle, this is pretty common for what they would have been carrying, I guess. It's high dollar. I mean, even for a poor Southern, they call it poor boy rifles, but still at the same time, they are not cheap compared to what else is out there.
Yeah. And that rifle you got there with that swoop down buttstock, that's pretty close to some of the Pennsylvania style rifles as well. It's derived from those.
Super thin, really simple, just but very expensive for the time.
Oh yeah.
To what else they have. Go ahead, sorry.
And if you look in some of the trade ledger records, they list some of those guns as like $48, $50 a pop. And we think, well, that's not that bad. But back in the day, that's 2 months' wages right there.
Mm-hmm.
A Hawken rifle would run, $48, $50, somewhere in those lines. Even some places, if you get out to the west, they could go up even as high as $100. So that's worth a lot of money.
Yeah. So let's talk about Ashley's 100, what they were armed with. There is a misconception out there that all 100 of them were armed with Hawken rifles because they stopped at the Hawken shop in St. Louis to outfit. You want to explain what they were doing there, though, instead of getting rifles?
Traps.
Yep.
The Hawkens not only made guns, but they made traps. They made knives. They were just kind of an overall blacksmith shop.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of those guys, they weren't carrying the fancy Hawkens. They were carrying whatever they brought home from back east. Mm-hmm. Or if they couldn't do that, they might get a cheap trade gun somewhere.
Yep. And we're not saying that there weren't any Hawkens that went up the river with them, but the Hawkens at the time probably looked a lot like that Pennsylvania rifle that we were just talking about. But let's talk about the most popular gun at the time. What was that, Duke? And I'll draw her up here.
Well, there was the Northwest trade gun, followed closely by the Lehman trade gun.
Which we don't have a
Lehman. But that one right there is one that dominates the fur trade through a majority of it. Clear back even into the 1700s.
Yep.
And some of them even further back than that.
Mm-hmm. If you guys didn't notice the difference between the one I just held up and this is a big, beefy, which this one is a replica. It's probably got a little more wood than some of the originals, but it's a big, beefy, smooth bore, 62 caliber flintlock.
Yep.
And you want to tell them why some people would prefer a smooth bore to a trade gun? Not always, but some did.
Some preferred the trade guns. One, they're cheap, and two, they're versatile.
Yep.
You could load shot in that and take small game. You could load a ball and take big game. And really, it derives down from the days of the Fowlers. And And the other reason that people liked them, they were cheap. That one, the Bent's Fort records said they were trading them for anywhere from 7 to 10 buffalo robes a piece. And if you figure they was paying on average $3 at a buffalo robe, anywhere from $21 to $30. So that's relatively cheap compared to, $40, $50, $60 for a fancier rifle.
Roughly half the cost for a gun that works just as good and actually does more.
Right.
Think of it think of it like an AR versus a shotgun.
Yeah. The other ones that were common, you see brown bess muskets on trade ledgers quite often. They were mill serps at this point, left over from the Revolution. A lot of brown besses got sent to Mexico, so they were definitely in the trade routes out there. Bent's Fort, when they did excavations, they found the side plates of 2 brown bess muskets down there. So they were out there.
Yeah.
Not nearly as common as the Northwest trade gun, but there were brown besses and probably a lot of other mill serps, probably Charlevilles. Might even see a Tula Jachas at some point. There was quite a bit of variety.
I was just going to point out that why you might choose a brown bess over the trade gun is it might even be cheaper. And now you're dealing with a 79 caliber smoothbore versus a 62. And so,
right.
You can fit a bigger piece of rock in it if you have to,
Yeah, if you're going to shoot a buffalo, I'd rather have the brown bess than the trade gun. Although the trade gun, at the right distance, it would do a number on a buffalo.
And I was going to show this off because we haven't done a video on this. This is an original 45 LSTB trade gun, 1080 serial number on it. Actually, it's got a stamped serial on the butt plate, but I'm not sure exactly what this is. I tried to get a hold of my brother and find out, but this is definitely an 1820, 25, somewhere in there, trade style musket. It's not military. Maybe it was military at one point and they cut it down, but it is like, look at the simplicity. And Duke pointed this out. It could have been restocked, but look at the simplicity of the side plate there. It's kind of crude. It's definitely not military. But this is what you would have gotten, and it's just a big smooth bore surplus trade musket. The only difference here is you got barrel bands, so you can take the barrel off and clean the gun a little easier.
Right.
So I thought you guys might like to see that. This might actually have been there. I don't know. Probably not, but you know what? This is a gun that would have been carried around in that era, I should say.
Oh, excuse me. Oh.
You all right there? You want to get over here?
Yeah, no, it's been a long day.
Before we move on, Stephen M. said, which book? I don't remember what he was referring to. George Washington had said, hope to see some of you during the fall rendezvous in Missouri. I'll have to look that up. I didn't even know there was one. I knew about the Hawken special. Stephen M. said, William and Milton sublet. Yeah, we're going to get to them. And Garza Vlogs is here. Hi, Garza. He said, hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. Yeah, and if you've ever been in that country, Stephen M. said it's not a rainforest. He's talking about, South Dakota. I prefer the German Jaeger style rifle with a short barrel. Well, Garza, we're going to get into some of that pretty soon. We got something like that coming. Stephen M. said flintlock was more dependable because rocks don't stay wet or require a supply chain. Exactly.
Yep. Even after the percussion cap had really caught on out here in the West, them trappers are still using their old flintlocks.
Yeah.
And you really don't see percussion guns out here in the West till the 1840s is really when they become prominent.
I tell a lot of people, because they always, when I make a video on something, I get some hang fires and this and that. And I always tell people, don't judge what I do as what the gun's capable of and those guys were capable of. It's a learning curve. It's an art. You can water seal those things down. You can put wax on the pan. You can do a lot of things to make them work better than even I can. It takes time to learn such things. Stephen M. said possibly a handful of 1803 Harper's Ferries. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
Being down there and with the 100. Smoothbore Fowlers and trade guns, Garza said, go way back, like 16th, 17th century. Possibly a favorite weapon of pirates and buccaneers, etc. Yeah, and we're caught up there in the chat. We do have 25 people in, so we're doing really good here.
Oh,
Guys,
wow.
I'm going to tell you right now that we have our set of rules here, and I don't figure that any of you are going to break them, but we keep it clean here on the chat, and we ask that you do it in the comment section as well, and we kind of stay out of politics where we can. We're about to dive into this off the deep end here, though, so let's talk about, we've already kind of discussed Hugh Glass and the bear attack and what all happened there. But let's talk about the, should we say, let's get into a more generalized story of Ashley and the 100. What happens after that?
So, yeah, they make their way up in the mountains, and I kind of lose track of them after that because that's where the excitement is. But, yeah, they make their way up in the mountains, and they have a pretty successful trapping venture, and it's going to start its own mini gold rush, if you will. So for the next, almost 20 years, not quite. I mean, you're going to see all kinds of guys heading west to trap beaver because beaver, in the heyday was bringing $4 a pound on average. You could get beaver pelts that weighed 2 pounds each. And a good trapper could trap 4 beaver a night. So right there, you're making $32 a night trapping beaver. You could work a job back east for $1 a day, and you still got to work a month to get close.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making a month's wages every day you're trapping. So really, it was a little mini gold rush. However, by the time they pay the exorbitant prices out here in the West to get their goods to resupply, nobody's getting really ahead except for the guys that are doing the selling.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask next. What is the difference between what we call the free trapper and the company guys?
So
are there
there's
free trappers going on now, or is this all company? Because we know Ashley is a company.
Yeah, in the early days, there's a handful of them you would consider free trappers. I would almost consider Hugh Glass to be somewhat of a free trapper. But yeah, you've got really 3 kinds. You've got the free trappers, the guys that own their own gear. They're not tied to a company. They can trap beaver wherever they want. Then you got the company guys. They're working for the company. They're employed by the company. And then you get the guys that owe the company money, so they're basically indentured servants that have to work to pay off their debt. And Joe Meek, if I remember right, it took about 3 years for Joe Meek to become a free trapper after he got out in the West, because he started out as a company man. And so when you start out as a company man, you're almost an indentured servant right there, because the company's going to give you whatever you need for supplies, and then you got to work to pay it back.
And that goes back to why so many guys had these.
Yep, exactly.
Smoothbore trade guns.
So yeah, I mean, there were a handful that managed to get out of it. But really, company men were probably more prominent, really, than the free trappers. And the free trappers are the ones we know the most about because they go on to be the most famous.
Okay. How many men would you expect to see in a group of trappers? I mean, 100 is a big number, in my opinion.
This is kind of getting into where my numbers aren't going to serve me well, and it's been so long since I read up on it. But men didn't go trapping alone, so we're going to get rid of that myth right out from the get-go. There's 1 or 2 guys, maybe 3 or 4, documented that go off trapping by their own. They all have the same thing in common. They all got killed.
Mm-hmm.
One of the more famous ones that actually made it for a longer time than the other guys was old Bill Williams. Old Bill Williams was notorious for trapping by himself and riding off by himself. But for the most part, you wanted to at least have one other guy with you when you're going out to set traps. One of the best resources out there for information is Osborne Russell's Journal of a Trapper. And he kind of talks about him going out parties 4, 5, 6. At one point, him and another guy are just out trapping, and the other guy decides, well, I'm going to go back to camp and do some other stuff. Or, no, excuse me. He said he's going to ride off somewhere else. They was on their way to Rendezvous and left Russell out by himself in the woods all alone. And when Russell finally caught up to him, the guy says, well, do you want to go trapping with me? And he says, no, I'm not going to go trapping with you. If you're going to run off and leave me alone, you can't be trusted anymore.
Mhm.
And that guy kind of wound up not sticking around very long. But yeah, for the most part, not a lot of guys were out there by themselves. One, and there's only one account of him being by himself, and that was Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick. He almost died because the Indians put the run on him, and he wound up losing his horse, his gun, most of his gear. He just had his knife with him, and when they finally made it to the rendezvous, he was almost dead.
Mhm.
And then there was another incident where he was out by himself. So I guess there's a couple of them. Another incident where he's out by himself, and that's how he earns the name Broken Hand, because he goes to pull his gun out, shoots his left hand, and the other name he had was Three Finger Fitzpatrick, because he basically blew off the pinky and ring finger of his left hand.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of the guys that when they wind up by themselves, even old Jedediah Smith went off by himself. He got killed.
Yep. He was traipsing through my country when that kind of went down, going down toward New Mexico. But the thing is, a lot of people don't realize cell service was worse then than it is now.
Yeah. Yeah, your call for help ain't going to go out very well.
So with Ashley's 100, a few more, and this is where I'm pretty hazy. I know this story vaguely, and I don't know if you know enough to talk about it, but John Coulter, does he go with the Ashley trip?
Yeah, and Coulter, he was out before them, as he came out with Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, he's an old timer.
And he decided he was going to stay out in the West, and so he does stay out in the West, travels around the Yellowstone country. So he's one of the few that, survived and was notorious for running around on his own. But Coulter takes a little part in the early fur trade days. One of the things about Coulter, and this could be tall tale, is that Coulter talks about, when he gets captured by the Blackfeet, him and the other guy gets pretty well cut apart and killed, and the Indians make Coulter run. Coulter outruns the Indians, and he says, I prayed to God that if he'd get me out of this, I'd leave the Rocky Mountains and never come back. Well, he leaves the Rocky Mountains. He survives, leaves the Rocky Mountains, hears of another trap adventure, goes out west, and isn't out there very long, and he runs in with the Blackfeet again, and he almost gets killed. And he says, well, I prayed to God a second time that if he'd get me out of this, I'd leave the mountains and I'd never come back. He got out of it alive, and he went back and got a farm in Missouri, and that's where he died.
Yep. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've always heard to tell that when he was running from the Indians, he ran so long, so hard that he was bleeding from his nose because his lungs were on the verge of bursting. And that's
I don't know if that's the case. It was probably a case like if I get worked real hard, I just start having a bad nosebleed.
Yeah.
But
we know he ran quite a ways before he supposedly found a beaver hut or whatever it was in the water. And
right. And then there's the other story of one of the Indians caught up to him and he took the lance away from him and stabbed him. But if you've ever read that book, Give Your Heart to the Hawks, well, that's a lot of fantasy in that book. There's a lot of stuff we can't really tell. There was a lot of creative license, I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Let's get over here to a few comments. Stephen M. said, important to remember even free trappers still worked out of groups.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, they did.
Victor Schultz said, U.S. strong. Franklin Horse said, I just tuned in to look at your hats. Thank you, Franklin. Trapper Paul said, Seth Kinman. Kyle Zybar said, sup, y'all. GC Simmons said, cool content. Thank you, guys. And we are running around 30 people. This is a good show right now. So,
all right.
Let's keep going now. What happens after Ashley, after the 100? You already said you kind of went into it, started a gold rush of pelts.
Yeah, so you start seeing a lot of guys coming out into the West, and in them early 1820s days, that's kind of the prime of the beaver trade. Really, it is. And it's all, of course, being driven by men's fashion, the big top hats back east. And And, anybody that's of any social importance, like a politician, doctor, lawyer, they're going to have big, fancy top hats. So that's what's really driving that industry. So as the years kind of go along, you start seeing more and more trappers coming out. You see them coming out clear into the 1830s. And that's when Osborne Russell comes out, is 1834. And he comes out kind of after that beaver takes its first hit on the price. And it drops from $4 a pound to $3 a pound. Not enough to deter people. It's still good business. But definitely enough to make some of these guys start to realize, hey, maybe trading instead of trapping for beaver pelts is the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you're going to see the Sublette brothers come in and start establishing trading posts out in the West.
So do the Sublette brothers officially, are they a company or a part of a company, or are they just
They are basically part of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company.
Okay.
So there's 3 big fur companies in the 1830s in operation. You have the Bent St. Vrain Company, and the Bent brothers, William and Charles, they come out west. They trapped with Saron St. Vrain, and Saron St. Vrain in about 1828 decides, well, beavers trapping's not doing like we thought it would. Maybe we should get in on that Santa Fe trade. That's where Jedediah Smith had got in. He was getting in on the Santa Fe trade when he got killed in 33. But the Santa Fe trade was really picking up really good because Santa Fe was kind of neglected by Mexico. And once Mexico got its independence in 1821, they started sending wagon trains to it from St. Louis. It was a multi-million-dollar business. Everybody was wanting to get in on the Santa Fe trade to make money. And that's really what's inspiring these guys. It's not to come out for the freedom of the mountains, this, that, and the other. It's all for money. Everybody's just trying to make a living.
That just reminds me, while you're saying that, I just remembered something my brother told me. This particular gun came in on a Spanish route. I know that much. So you're looking at, if this was in the trade era, I can't remember where he got this. One of these days I'll have him do a full video on it, but this came in on a Spanish route from somewhere down in the southwest. So that could very well be part of the Santa Fe,
It could be an El Camino Real gun.
It could be. I don't know what all goes on down there. You have to tell me what that is.
Right. The El Camino Real was the royal road that connected Santa Fe to Mexico City.
Mm-hmm. That very well could be it, because he said it came in on a Spanish trade route. So
right, yeah, and that was kind of the big one in the early days. So anyway, yeah, you see the Bent St. Vrain Company get formed up about that time, late 1820s, early 1830s. Rocky Mountain Fur Company gets going. The American Fur Company's been going for a few years now. American Fur Company pretty well dominates the Missouri River. Bent St. Vrain is going to dominate the Arkansas River. And then the Rocky Mountain Fur Company kind of comes in between, in the middle, down on the Platte River.
Mm-hmm.
So price of beaver takes hit 1833 there. In 1834, William Sublette and the Rocky Mountain Fur Company decide to establish a trading post out where the Laramie and Platte Rivers come together, North Platte River. And so in the spring, they start setting up, building a cottonwood log stockade that's going to bear the name Fort William. And from there, William Sublette heads for the Rendezvous, leaves a handful of men back to work on the fort. And really, before he gets a chance to really spend a lot of time at that fort, William gets kicked out of his own company because he wasn't easy to get along with. Even his brother was in on ousting him because he was kind of a pain in the rear end, to put it bluntly. So he winds up going on and doing his own venture after that. But the fort is going to bear his name, Fort William, for quite a few years, until after the Rocky Mountain Fur Company's out of business there.
Yep. What about the big Kahuna Company? And I saw it come up over here, and I know you're going to talk about it in a minute. But you have all these American companies. I don't think they hold a candle to the Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah, then you got the big Hudson Bay Company, and they're kind of operating up there in Oregon, Montana. They're probably one of the biggest reasons why the Blackfeet attack the mountain men so often up in, the Montana area. That was basically to get rid of the competition. It's like, oh yeah, we'll give you guns if you go shoot these Americans over here. Because the Blackfeet were always trading with the Hudson Bay, but they didn't want nothing to do with the Americans.
That's kind of goes along with the story of the Northwest Gun. A lot of these coming out of the Hudson Bay Company. The Blackfeet had a deal, and I'm not stepping on your toes, I'm sorry, but
no,
Blackfeet had a deal with the Hudson Bay Company that they would trade their Northwest trade guns with the Blackfeet tribe and none of the others. And the trouble with that was, of course, Hudson Bay was trading them. They were trading them to everybody they could. And the Indians actually caught, the way I understand it, one of their tradesmen with a load of those heading out there and tried to get through the Rocky Mountain passes up there. And the Blackfeet removed him of his head, sent it back, and said, "Don't trade to nobody but us." I've heard that.
Yeah, I haven't read that particular account, but I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, and the Blackfeet, they weren't, the devils that they get portrayed in some of the movies. There was one account of they did come across an American trapper that was doing ill, and they basically took him in, nursed him back to health, and then told him that we're going to turn you loose now. If we ever see you again, we're going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they weren't the big bullies that Hollywood likes to portray them.
I think they were respected.
Yeah, they were honorable. I put it that way. They were an honorable tribe. And even the mountain men, the journals make them out to be pretty ornery. But they were honorable about it, at least.
Mm-hmm.
But
we were talking about the fur companies, and you were on the sublet.
Yeah. So at the time that William establishes Fort William down on the Laramie, he's got another fur trading post up on the Missouri called Fort William, and then Bent St. Vrain Company down on the Arkansas has got a fur trading post called Fort William after William Bent. So that's where you start to see the names of fur trading forts take on the additive of what river they're on or where they're located. So you'd have Fort William up on the Missouri, Fort William on the Arkansas, and Fort William at the Laramie. And of course, the one Fort William at the Laramie is going to get shortened down to Fort Laramie quite a few years later. But before Sublette really get kicked out of the business, he comes to a gentleman's agreement with the American Fur Company that if he's to close his post on the Missouri, the American Fur Company would not attend the Rendezvous for 2 seasons. So Sublette the Rocky Mountain Fur Company winds up getting essentially a monopoly for 2 seasons on the Rendezvous, and I can't remember exactly what 2 years that was, but you'd think that would have been enough for that company to kind of get itself ahead, get some of its debts paid off, and really start to grow, but it was kind of doomed from the get-go. Because after that gentleman's agreement is done, the American Fur Company comes back in, and by about 1836, 1837, the American Fur Company decides they want the slice of the pie down on the Platte, because the Platte River Post is doing some pretty decent business. And Thomas Fitzpatrick's pretty well running the operation at that point. And to kind of settle the debts that the Rocky Mountain Fur Company owes the American Fur Company, he basically sells out, and American Fur Company is going to take over in 1838. And it's at this point in 1838 that the price of beaver takes a major hit. And it says that the price of beaver stops at 90 cents per pound on the market. So your beaver pelts that were bringing $6 a piece, now they're only going to bring $2 a piece. Beaver are starting to really get trapped out in a lot of regions. The only places that are still really wealthy in furs is way up in the Montana range, and those beaver aren't as high a demand because the beaver up there are much darker in color. They're almost jet black. The southern Rocky Mountain beaver, which you find in Wyoming, further south, they're still in pretty good demand because they got a lighter color fur. However, most of those are within the boundary of Mexico. And Mexico don't take too kindly to American trappers trapping on their territory.
A lot of them tried it.
Yeah, there was a lot of them that did. They wouldn't go to Santa Fe to trade in their furs, of course. And there's no real evidence that a lot of them did business at Bent's Fort, but a lot of trappers were known to hang out around the Taos area. And Taos was out far enough away that you're not going to have a government official coming in checking where you got your furs at. And so they managed to get away with it. There's only one group of trappers I know of that got an appointment, or basically a trapping license, from the Mexican government, and that was Walker's band of trappers. Joseph Walker, who was one of those early guys that came out and spent a lot of time out in the West. He trapped out towards California, was known to steal horses and sheep in California and then bring them back east and sell them. At one point, yeah, he brought a herd of horses to Bent's Fort and sold them there. But yeah, there was a lot of trapping that was being done in the southern Rocky Mountains. Pretty much everything in the Wyoming, Wind River Range, the Bighorn Mountains, they're starting to get trapped out pretty heavily by the time that you start getting into the 1830s. And then by 1840, I mean, there's so few trappers attend the rendezvous because the price of beaver is so low that's the last rendezvous in 1840. They cancel it for 1841. It just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. Now, the price of beaver does come back a little bit. In 1842, it brings about $4 a pound, but that's very short-lived, at which point it drops off again, and then it really doesn't come back.
Yeah. And that's the overall view, but correct me if I'm wrong, but what is it? Smith that got in big trouble for trapping Mexico territory, wound up in jail time down there for a while.
Yeah. Of course, Jed was all over the country. He wound up in California and all out there, but if I remember right, he did get in a little trouble for trapping down there. There was a handful of them that did. But usually, you do a little time, then they turn you loose. But for the most part, there was a lot of trappers they didn't catch.
Yeah. Let's get over here right quick and read some comments. Trapper Paul said Seth Kinman, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit, I believe. But Kyle said, sup, y'all. GC Simmons said, cool content. Constitutional Carpenter said, this is great stuff. Well, thank you. I guess Duke's the one doing all the work here. Stephen M said Fort William, of course. And then he said, and Trapper Paul said, talk about Hudson Bay Company. Steve M said, I was a mountain man for old Fort Laramie from 82 to 87. Hey, you two have something in common.
Yeah. I think, Stephen, you reached out to me on email and we talked about that. That's been a few years ago. Hopefully we're going to have a fur trade thing going on here next year. We'll see if that plays out or not.
Mm-hmm. Gabe Beatty said, Beaver gave some great hats. Yeah, if you look at gentleman's styles and stuff, even to this day, there are people who will give a lot of money for even a fedora made out of beaver. It's still,
and if you can come across once in a while, there's some companies out there that make reproductions of the actual top hats from that era, and they're not the fine fur like what we've got in our hats. They're the real shaggy hats. Hats. They bring about $400 or $500 for a top hat. That style. It's beaver hats. They're still out there and they're not cheap. Your Stetsons, your Resistals that you go to buy at the hardware store, they've got a lot of rabbit in them because they found out, you can chop up rabbit fur and it acts somewhat similar. Some of them have wool in them. The thing about the wool ones is when they get wet, they shrink up real bad. But when you come across one that's 10X pure beaver, you figure on paying about $100 an X. They ain't cheap.
Snapper's in. Hi, Snapper. He's our wrench out there, guys. So he's moderating. Stephen M said Fort John in between.
Yep, we're going to get into that here in a little bit.
Okay. Snapper said, if you're enjoying the chat, make sure you hit that like button. Yeah, thank you, Snapper. Franklin Horse said, so you could get in trouble over Mexico. Never mind. You about got me there. Garza Vlogs, who organized the rendezvous? We'll answer that in just a second. And Gabe said, no, sir, it ain't cheap. And Christopher Mead said, I'm 49 minutes late. Well, we're glad you're here. But let's get back up here into, there was a couple questions here. Let's go ahead and go who organized the rendezvous from Garza Blogs.
I got to be honest with you. I don't recall because the first one I think was 1827, 1828. And if I remember right, Sublette was involved in that. Basically, a lot of these fur trading companies were wanting to get involved because it took so long for the mountain men to come down out of the mountains and get their goods from the fur trading post and head back up. And so they decided, well, we'll just bring the business to the mountain men and then charge an exorbitant price for whatever they was selling. So really, it was kind of a bunch of different groups getting together to do it. But yeah, I don't remember exactly. I think it was 27. Somebody out there that might know better, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 1827 was the first one.
Yeah. And they were, and Sublette was at a lot of them. I know that much. So
he was definitely at a lot of them because I think he was getting started even back in the late 20s. You see a lot of the guys really getting into doing the trading in the late 20s there. Like I said, St. Vrain and the Bent brothers kind of formed their company up then. Of course, they don't found Fort William down there, Bent's Fort, till 1833. But there's accounts of them in 29 doing stuff. But yeah, by the time you get into the 30s, you know, it's Rocky Mountain Fur Company, American Fur Companies in on it, as well as probably a handful of private individuals. I do remember reading about the first rendezvous. They managed to get two Dearborn wagons to the rendezvous, along with a handful of ox carts, what we also call as a Red River cart. But yeah, that's kind of when and then don't ask me what year was where, because that's one I definitely don't remember. I just know Popoaggie was a popular spot. Green River was popular. There was another spot over by Kemmer. I think there was one rendezvous over in Idaho. Most of them were in Wyoming. And then, I can't think of the other one that was a popular spot. But yeah, a lot of them, Popoaggie, Green River, over in that part of the area, kind of in the middle of the beaver trapping range.
Yeah. I was just going to say about Sublette, if you guys haven't checked out the channel, go over there and check out Turkey Creek 1823. He's good. He's a friend of the channel here. Love to get him on the chat here someday. But he does several videos on the subject, and he talked about in one video he talked about William Sublette showing up in the 1830s with another guy with a couple of the noted first cap lock rifles that those guys had seen, and that was well into the middle of the fur trade era. And it was such a strange thing to see a cap lock rifle. They made note of that Bill Sublette had a cap lock rifle. So that's how rare those were at the time.
Yeah. And then if you look, oh, good Lord. Can't think of the guy's name now. Drips? No, not Drips. Newell, old Doc Newell. Doc Newell's trade ledgers, and I think it was in 34, and you can find it online if you do it. But anyway, in 34, they've got a copy of his trade ledger and of what he took to the rendezvous. And I think it was 1,000 caps. He took 1,000 percussion caps. Now, maybe it was 36. Anyway, it was in the 30s. He took 1,000 percussion caps and something like 5,000 gun flints. So that tells you kind of an idea of which one's more prominent.
Definitely.
But yeah, and I seen in the comments there, Stephen M's 1825. Yeah, I knew it was somewhere around there. So the rendezvous runs for about 15 years. Then, of course, like I said, 1840 gets shut down. And that's when the fur trading companies are really going to change their focus. on what they're trading for. So even clear back in 38 is when Bent St. Vrain Company really note that they start sending in buffalo robes, but buffalo robes are going to supplant the beaver and the fur trade. And the Rendezvous era is gone. The beaver era pretty well dwindles out, and it's going to be that buffalo robe trade at these same trading posts that's going to keep them alive for, the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, and that's going to be a whole video all of its own, the buffalo hunters someday, I can already tell you.
Yeah, we're not even talking about this. Is just the fur trade era still. I mean, this is still the same guys that were trapping beaver. Now they're going out and they're trading with the Indians for buffalo robes.
Well, let's get into I have a question for you before we go much further. The big companies, what's their policies? I'm not talking about Hudson Bay because I know their policies, but the American policies on trading with the natives. Are the natives coming to the Rendezvous and getting the same price as everybody else, or they sending agents out there, or what?
So yeah, the Indians had come to the Rendezvous. So basically, in order to trade legally, you had to get a trade license from the government, say where you're going to be operating at, if you're going to have a trading post, this, that, and the other. And for the most part, it's open to just trade in the Indian Territory. Sometimes I've seen one or two that's limited to just Rendezvous or just beaver trade. But for the most part, it's just general trade operations. If you're doing it legal. Now, there were the guys that come out here and just did whatever because there's really no police force at this point that's going to stop them. This is the absolute Wild West. There's no law west of the Mississippi. Other than the law, the gun, and the Bible.
Yeah, this is the true Wild West. I like to tell people to talk about the gun that won the Wild West or whatever in 1876. In my opinion, the Wild West is over right after the Civil War, a lot of it anyway. But this is the there's Arizona and some really outlaw-y places that hang on, but this is what I imagine. This is when a lot of people came to settle these little areas, before the settlers came, and
right.
It's just there's nothing. You're on your own.
It's that time where, it's kill or be killed. You're going to have to hunt to survive. You're going to have to live off the land. You're going to have to learn who the people are, how to deal with them, because, one group of Indians might be friendly to you. The next group may not be. They might decide to, scalp you and take everything you got. If you get robbed, well, there's nobody to come arrest the person that robbed you. You go borrow a weapon from somebody else, and you go get it back. So yeah, this is about as wild as it can get, and really, it's an era where men are decivilizing. It's what do they call it? Dissimulation. So a lot of these guys, they're marrying into the native tribes. They're taking on the native customs. It's the primitive. It's the wild, wild west. It's the stuff we can only dream about. And then a lot of people dream about it and think it's this glorious thing. And in reality, it was tough living.
Anybody that's been in a river in a pair of buckskin breeches knows what kind of tough living that is.
Exactly. And you're in that river in the cold of winter. You're not trapping beaver when it's 70 degrees in the summer. You're trapping beaver when it's growing ice on the rivers.
Yep.
And guess what? Your moccasins, when you jump in that river, you can't take them off when you get back to camp. You got to wear them suckers till they're dry.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's going to be a hard time getting them back on. But let's get into that while we're here. A lot of people have this misconception of the mountain man of a Davy Crockett style coonskin cap and buckskins and fringes from head to toe. And let's get into what their clothes would have been, and progress it. Let's start like 1825. What are we talking about?
So a lot of the early guys coming out, they're probably going to still have their cloth clothing. But by the time they're out here for a few years, they're going to be wearing buckskin clothing, pretty much an entire suit of buckskin. And there was even trappers that prided themselves on looking like Indians. In fact, old Bill Williams almost gets arrested at one point because he decides to go play an Indian and ride up against, I think it was Fremont's men. If not, it was another set of soldiers that was patrolling out in the west. But either way, he sees the soldiers out there, and so he takes off riding at them, shooting off his gun, screaming the bloody murder, and scares the heck out of them. And then when they realize it's a white man, they pretty much arrest him. And for him, it was just a big joke to see if he could scare them. But yeah, these guys are clad in buckskin. They're going to be wearing buckskin shirts. They're going to be wearing buckskin jackets. They're going to be wearing buckskin pants or leggings. By the time, you start getting in the 1830s, some of these fur trading posts, yeah, you might be able to go buy some cloth pants, but you're going to pay dear for them. Cloth shirts are a little bit cheaper. Red calico shirts, so real soft, heavy red shirts, those were extremely popular. You see them listed almost everywhere in the record. A lot of red calico. Oh God, what was I going to say? Not pinstripe. Pillow ticking. You see pillow ticking listed as shirts, as well as some other prints, some other calicos. So yeah, they were wearing cloth shirts, but for the most part, pants and buckskin jackets and shirts, because that's what's going to last out here in the West. Your cloth and wool pants, after you go on horseback through the rough country, you ain't going to have much left protecting your legs. Go ahead.
A guy, you can picture him, a guy who's been out for a year. You're going to see moccasins, buckskin pants, probably a calico shirt, not necessarily buckskin shirt, but you could have. And what about the hat? As we all, and I know this is a pet peeve of yours, seeing all these fur hats.
So fur hats did happen. They were out there. They weren't the Davy Crockett style with the face on them. Not that I've seen. They weren't an entire coyote pelt that draped down past your butt cheeks. That's kind of getting a little bit ridiculous. It's more of a Hollywood thing. Do you see buffalo caps? So, a hat made out of buffalo hair. Do you see muskrat caps? Once in a while, you see them mention somebody wearing a coonskin for a hat or a wildcat, but not real common. Mostly going to be broad-brimmed hats, just like what I'm wearing. Mm-hmm. Pretty soft. You see that a lot. And the 1837 sketchbook, which is sketches that are taken from Alfred Jacob Miller, who was an artist that come out during this time period. That gives you a really good idea of the style of clothing they're wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to,
I got it over there, but it's a source you have to have if you're going to be into this. I believe the 1837 sketchbook of the fur trade. Right.
Another common style of hat, especially for a winter hat, is one they call a wolf ear cap, made out of deer skin or a blanket. Hudson Bay blankets were very common for coats in the winter. Once in a while,
the red on that one, but it's above the
right. Once in a while, you see buffalo robe coat mentioned, but those weren't as common. But yeah, the Hudson Bay capotes, they're really mentioned in there quite a bit. So yeah, these guys weren't dressed in European fashion at this point. They're kind of like I said, it's that dissimulation. They're dissimilating from European civilized society to what they considered savage society back then, the Native American societies, taking on some of their customs, some of their clothing, their style of dress. And really, it comes down to it was a necessity because, heck, you can trade an Indian, a couple bars of lead, a little bit of powder, and get a set of moccasins, get a pair of pants, a shirt. If you have some horses, you can possibly marry into a tribe, get an Indian wife, and then she makes all the stuff for you. But yeah, moccasins, you better learn how to make moccasins because that's what you're going to be doing around the campfire at night. When you're not tending to beaver skins, is you're going to be sewing yourself as many pairs of moccasins as you can because you're going to go through those pretty fast.
20-mile moccasins, I believe, is what it's called in the books.
Yep.
You get 20 miles out of them. You're doing pretty good.
I hear a lot about
beads. I was about to say, what about beads? Beads. Sorry.
One
they're all
thing
the
where I
same
do
size.
see mention of beadwork is in moccasins. They just do a few beads that decorate around the top of what they call a pucker vamp.
Mhm.
And then like real intricate style beadwork, not real common, especially when you're running around. Each tribe is kind of known for their style of beadworking or quill working. And say that you're in with the Shoshone and you're wearing their kind of bead or quill work, and then you wind up over in the territory where the Cheyenne are running around at, well, you might come out with a short haircut that don't grow back.
Mhm. Beads are a very tradable and expensive commodity.
Right. And beads, I mean, were traded, but not specifically traded. They were kind of used as make up the difference in a trade or given away as gifts. But, they got used by the natives quite a bit, especially when you start getting into the buffalo robe trade era.
Yeah.
But beadwork, not quite as prominent. It really doesn't get to be real prominent until you start getting in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah. Let's get over here to the comments. We got a few here. Stephen M said Ham's Fork and the Beaver and Bear River. Gabe Beatty said, "Oh yes, Buffalo Hunters. That'll probably be a good video." Yeah, I think that will be a good video because I know that even though Duke doesn't really specialize in it, I know he's got some knowledge of it because it always flows with everything you do. The buffalo hunting era up to about.
Oh, right, yeah.
So that might have to be another video.
That's another talk for another day.
Yeah.
We're going to touch on the early part of that here in a minute if we finish up with the buffalo part of the fur trade. But, yeah, that's another topic.
Yeah. We started early tonight, guys, so we can go as long as we want. And we do that with these Duke videos. Most of these chats, I go an hour and a half. When I got Duke on here, just the amount of knowledge that he can lay on us, I let him go.
Yeah, we might go an hour and a half. Might have to, probably have to shut it down after 2 hours because I got to work tomorrow. But
okay, Gabe said, for whatever reason, I didn't hit the like button. Well, shame on you. Stephen M said, I'm going to click on these because I can bring them up. Yeah, okay. He said, seen the Rockies from northern British Columbia, Alberta to the Mexican border, some by foot, by horseback, motorcycle, truck, all with Bertha across my pommel and the hat and my picture on my head. That's a pretty good hat right there, I think, for the era. If you look at it, it looks like yours. Trapper Paul said, Grizzly Adams.
Oh, God.
Stephen M said, my leggings are wool.
Yeah, and wool leggings were common. You see that? Trying to think. There's one of I think it's Alfred Jacob Miller's paintings. Has a trapper running from a grizzly bear with just leggings and nothing else on. Probably
Franklin
was in the answer to call of nature.
Franklin Horse said, wool to sleep in. Yeah. Stephen M says, buckskins to the knees, wool below, dry faster and retains heat.
Yep.
Trapper Paul said, bear hats.
Oh, for crying out loud, no.
And Constitutional
I turn my camera off here right quick for a second.
Constitutional Carpenter says, hating on my coyote pelt hat.
Yeah.
And Gabe Beatty said, I ain't so sure I'd like to spend my time in buckskin, but I tell my respect for the trapper has gone up. Yeah.
I tell you what, wearing new buckskin is it's extremely soft. It's amazing how soft a new buckskin pair of pants feels. It's almost like wearing modern fleece pajamas.
And it also depends on if it's veg tan or an old-fashioned brain hide, how it wears.
Right. And brain tan is very soft if done right.
Yeah. We got to do some videos on that. Bear
yeah,
Claw.
hopefully I'm going to have about 10 hides here coming up pretty soon.
We put a bunch in the freezer last winter we need to do something with. So,
well, if I can make it down your way here before too long, I might show you how to do that.
That'd be cool. Trapper Paul, we were talking about trading, and he brought up bear claws. What do you think of that?
I mean, they're a trade item. They'd be worth value, but not a lot of value because even the Indians knew better than to go chasing after a bear in the brush.
Very true.
Yeah, because it was, I think as Osborne Russell talks about that shot a bear and wounded it. Decided to go in after the brush, and the bear about got him. And he said if it wasn't for the fact that he was a good climber, he wouldn't have come out of that situation alive. And he said that was the first and last time he would ever chase a bear into the brush after being wounded.
Well, what about the pistols? Let's talk about that a little bit while your camera's off and I can show some stuff off.
Okay, yeah.
Mountain Man era pistols.
Basically anything with a flintlock and a single barrel.
You now you're hating on my double barrel pistol.
Well, no, that one would be okay, but it wouldn't be very common.
Yeah, I think I would take one of these out there. If I had the ability and the money, it's going to be about twice as expensive as anything else. But you asked me to bring a special pistol to this video, Duke, and I didn't know why. I thought maybe you had a story on it.
Actually, I haven't seen anything listed on double barrel pistol, but I have seen one or two mentions of double barrel shotguns that was early enough that they were probably flintlock.
Yeah, similar to EA.
Yeah.
That would be, like I said, if you had one of these and a double barrel pistol, they'd probably be pretty envious of you, or a swivel breech rifle or something like that. But
The problem with a double barrel pistol is how do you tuck it under your belt?
that's true. There's no place on the lock for a belt hook like a lot of them have.
No.
So my guess would be I would carry this in a saddle holster.
Right. Now, you could make a holster to go on your belt for it, and I have seen a couple holsters from the Mountain Man era that were on the belt for single shots.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, that would be one that was probably, packed on a saddle.
You asked me to bring this Queen Anne's pistol out. And this is an original Queen Anne's, very unique style.
Right.
Pistol.
Now,
So
imagine. Well, I was going to say, imagine that with a full stock under the barrel, and you're pretty close to what you probably would see the trappers running around with out here.
Oh, as far as Ketlins?
Oh, I mean just pistols in general.
Yeah.
Your typical pirate pistol, if you will.
Oh, I thought you might have meant, like, this one's pretty ornate. You know, the Queen Anne's got the lion
Right.
on it. This one's an original from that era. I'm not exactly. This is my brother's pistol, so I'm not exactly sure.
What the point I was trying to make is that cannon barrel shaped barrel on those pistols, that's fairly common. You even see that on the Ketlins. Ketlin trade pistols were fairly common. But most of them they're going to be like the rifles. Whoever makes them, you're going to see them out there. You might see Milsurp pistols at the very, very end of the fur trade area. You might see a handful of these guys.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say a handful. Now, there's one account. Well, there's two accounts of there's one with Kit Carson and a group of mountain men all having these pistols, but that takes place in 1840s. So really kind of is outside of that beaver part of the mountain men era.
Outside of the fur trade.
Right. And then the next one is actually with old Bill Williams. So there's a book out there called My 60 Years on the Plains by William Hamilton. And Hamilton come out in the 40s with old Bill Williams. And old Bill Williams is one of those trappers that just don't know how to quit trapping. So even when beaver is extremely low price, he's out still trying to trap and trade and get beaver wherever he can. And Hamilton talks about all of the trappers that were in that brigade, and I forget how many men total, all of them had a pair of these. And I don't know if they'd all have a pair. I think that's more of a Texas thing. I have no doubt, the Texas Ranger boys had pairs because that's pretty well documented. But that's really the only source where you see them mentioning each trapper having a pair. Now, do I believe that, you might have had 1, 2, 3 trappers in them that had one of those? Oh, absolutely. I don't doubt it. The thing of it is there's a trade-off with it. You have the ability to shoot 5 times and, with a weaker round, or you can shoot the enemy and hit them once with that single barrel pistol and knock them out for good.
Let's, I brought this up because I wanted to show a lot of people will ask, well, where's the ramrod? Well, this is a Queen Anne's pistol. It's kind of cool. Like I said, this is original. The replicas they sell today don't actually work this way, but the way this works,
screw barrel.
No front sight. You simply
Yep. It's a
Unscrew
screw
the
barrel
barrel.
pistol.
You drop the ball. You don't have to ram it. It can be oversized. Squeeze the barrel. Drop the ball down in there. Pour your powder behind it. And then you just screw it back on there. It's got little line-up grooves so you know when it's tight and you're ready to go. So that would have been, I'm not saying one of these didn't make it, but this would have been an expensive piece to have wound up out there. Because anytime you're dealing with rifling or threads, things tend to get expensive. But what about brass barrel pistols? Because most of the Kettland replicas we see today got brass barrels. Is that a thing?
Right. And you would see brass barrel guns. More rare, certainly more rare, but they did happen. And that was basically as a means to make a cheaper gun. And I don't know if they got cheaper because usually a rifle with brass fittings compared to iron fittings cost more. So I don't know what the thought was there. But one of the reasons why the British were trying to adopt brass barrels was for the naval service.
Mm-hmm.
Because you put salt water on an iron barrel, it's going to pit.
Mm-hmm.
You put salt water on a brass barrel, it's going to turn green. So I think that was probably some of the thinking there, is it was to help prevent corrosion.
Now, how about blunderbusses? I think you and I talked about this. You didn't see a blunderbuss on. Somebody's mentioned it on the ledgers.
I think there was mention once.
Yeah.
And I don't even think they called it a blunderbuss. We had to kind of dig around to figure out that it was a blunderbuss. But yeah, and they're not really all that common. I mean, you can't really aim a blunderbuss with that flared muzzle and an undersized ball. You really aren't going to have that good of accuracy. And if I had to choose between that and a 62 caliber Northwest trade gun with a grizzly bear charging at me, I'm taking the trade gun.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. I'm going to read these and then we'll go back into where we were on the history, because I know that Fort John you were wanting to get into and some of that stuff in the Buffalo era. Let's see. Where did we stop here? Be a good video. Let's see. We stopped at the leggings are warm. Hating on the okay. We stopped at bear claws. Franklin Horse said, until you sweat, he's talking about buckskin being soft, until you sweat in it and let it dry a few times.
Yeah, no. Yeah, after you wear it for, a week or two, it starts to get kind of stiff and starts to rot out. But yeah, when you first put it on, brand new pair of pants, oh man, it feels just like a nice set of jammies.
Yeah. And Franklin Horse said flintlock howdah. Kind of, you could call it that, but really these were actually really popular from the 1650s all the way through. I mean, if you had to be on horseback and you like were a highwayman in Europe or something, these were really popular for that kind of thing because it's more concealable than a long gun. And if you're going to have a pistol or two pistols, you might as well have more barrels, the better. If you're a highwayman, you could afford a horse anyway, so you might as well be carrying you a double barrel pistol. And there were a lot of these around ever since the doglock era. Probably even a few matchlock ones, to be honest with you. But Garza Blocks, any flintlock military surplus pistol would be okay. That's directed to you. Yeah, pretty much. I'd say any mil serp that wasn't more than 40, 50 years old. Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't use a fusil de chasse. That's a little bit too old for that era. But yeah, anything from Revolutionary War on up would definitely be appropriate. Yeah.
We were talking about carrying that on the belt, and Stephen M said you don't. It's a pommel gun. Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Snapper said I need a Queen Anne pistol. Stephen M said I have a dream rifle build called What Would Ashley Do? Hey, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah.
Kind of like What Would Stoner Do? Dream rifle build called What Would Ashley Do? Loosely based on forgotten weapons of what would Stoner do with today's knowledge and materials. There you go. I'd watch that. I'd watch it.
Yeah. The only thing is, Ashley was a pretty well-off guy, so he probably would have had a pretty fancy rifle.
You're going to talk about a swivel breech or something like that.
Yeah, probably. And there was probably a handful of those out there too. I don't think I remember ever seeing one mentioned, but yeah, you hear Pennsylvania pattern, Kentucky pattern, Milser, Northwest trade guns, that kind of stuff. Once in a while, you see a Hawken mentioned, not very often. And the nice thing about the Hawkens is there's a book out there that tells you just how common they were.
That's right.
Or weren't. And a lot of them actually went to the American Fur Company. There's only one account at Bent's Fort of a Hawken, and that was one that Charles Bent bought in 1846, just before he got killed in 1847.
When you're talking about Hawkins, you're talking about full stock flintlocks, but when you get into the 1840s, we'll talk about that when we get into the 1840s here a little bit.
Yep.
Things get changed. That book you're talking about, I believe, is The Hawken Rifle, Its Place in History by Charles E. Hanson Jr., right?
Yep, that'd be it.
That's a really good book. Not very big, but it's a good book. What were you saying? Sorry, I interrupted you.
I think I pretty well finished it.
Okay. Franklin Horse asked, didn't any of them take up archery?
I've never seen any mention really much of. In fact, I've never seen a mention of him using a bow, except for Louis Girard, and he came out in the 40s. Louis Girard talked about a Mexican guy at Bent's Fort that was using a bow and arrow. That's really the only one I can remember any mention of him using a bow.
It's funny you bring that up because I believe it was Quanah Parker and some of those guys, like in the 1870s, people were talking about how nobody in their tribe, even in the 1870s, hardly knew how to use a bow anymore. So,
yeah.
Bows are popular, yeah, but even with the Indians, when they get their hands on a trade gun.
Exactly.
Franklin Horse said, whiskey in the jar. You actually have a recording of that video over here on our channel. Let's see. We got a couple more here, and then we'll take off again. Arizona Ghost Riders in. Hi, Santee. He said, hey, all you rogues.
Hey, Santee.
Snapper said, I can't hit anything with my British Sea Service pistol, flintlock pistol. Yeah, me neither. Franklin Horse said, whiskey in the jar. Arizona Ghost Rider. Hawkins were pretty popular then. Not really.
They were famous, but if you mean popularity as everybody had one, no. They were popular that everybody wanted one probably, but not everybody had one. They were expensive, and they were kind of a rarity. You really don't start seeing them get going strong until the 1840s.
Yeah. I'm going to say that there's one author of the time, and I can't remember what the book is. And the reason the Hawken is so famous is because the author of Crow Killer read this book. I can't remember his name either. But he made a note of going into a cabin and just being awestruck by the fact that this cabin in the Rocky Mountains, they opened the door and there was a Hawken rifle hanging above the fireplace. And it was just such an amazing thing because everybody knew about them. But
right.
Nobody had them.
Yeah, and I was recently over at the Museum of the Fur Trade, and they had 3 Hawkens, and that's the most original Hawkens I've seen in one setting.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you go over to the over to Missouri, they have the Hawken original now, where you can actually, some people can go shoot an original, and they show a bunch of originals, and it's just the story of the Hawken is there might be 5,000 of them made over a 40-year period.
Yeah,
on the high end. And at least 2,000 of those went east. A couple of them went to some fort. You can probably tell me which fort it was. There was a handful of them went to a fort up north.
Fort Union, I believe it was.
Yeah, and but really you're looking at grand total of 2,000, maybe even staying close to the Missouri, let alone just a handful of those going out west. They're just expensive. People in the east liked them better, just as good as the people in the west. So,
that's about as how many of these was out and about.
Yeah. Very rare. But that changes as time goes on, of course. But go ahead. Well, let me see. We got a couple more here, and then we'll go on.
Right.
I say there's Stephen M's talking about archery. He said something about nope. Even if you ever want to elaborate later, I'll try to fill you in. Okay. And Franklin Horse says, love my repo Hawken. Absolutely. I love them too. They're some of the best shooting guns out there.
Yeah, they're not bad. Shooting wise. Yeah, so let's see, where was that? Oh, the thing I was going to say is, there were a lot of famous mountain men that did have Hawken rifles. Tom Tobin had a Hawken rifle, weighed 28 pounds. Yeah, I'd hate to have to lug that thing around. Kit Carson had a Hawken. Jim Bridger had a Hawken. James Beth works Beckworth supposedly had a Hawken. But the thing about their Hawken rifles is they weren't mountain men anymore when they had their Hawken rifles. This is 1840s and 50s.
Yep.
That they get them. Actually, even in the Civil War, because Tom Tobin used his to shoot the Espinosa brothers. And that was during the Civil War. Kit Carson had his, late. Actually, the one that Kit Carson is documented to carrying when he was a trapper was a Dickert rifle, which is a Pennsylvania style.
And Lehman rifles. A lot of Lehman rifles out there.
There was a lot of Lehman rifles. So, yeah, they're
cheaper.
almost as common as a Northwest trade gun. Almost. Not quite.
But, guys, this is a Great Plains, Lyman Great Plains gun. It's pretty close to what you're going to see an original Hawken looking like. Not a lot of brass furniture.
Yep.
Not a lot of fanciness. Real simple. This one's left-handed, of course, but real simple screw side lock plate there. But heavy barreled, big boy. Wouldn't want to carry this if I had to walk anywhere.
And, the thing about that Hawken is that's 1840s and later.
Yeah. This is what they were carrying, old men.
Right. And that book, My 60 Years on the Plains by William Hamilton, said that when they went to California for the gold rush, once they had enough gold, they bought Sharps rifles because Sharps rifles start coming out in the late 1840s. They bought Sharps rifles and turned their Hawken barrels into crowbars.
Yeah, no, that's sad. That is really
and they used their Hawken rifles to dig gold.
Well, breech loader.
Yep. And then, there's a couple of examples of Hawken rifle barrels, or at least barrel chunks, being used for hide scraping tools by the natives.
And it's not because the rifles are junk or anything. It's just because that's a big, heavy chunk of iron in that barrel. You know it?
Yeah. I mean, them Hawken barrels were so good that they said they made excellent crowbars. So they turned them into crowbars.
Look at the difference of this Southern mountain rifle style mountain rifle from Tennessee. Look at that. It's like you can wrap your hand all the way around that dude. And then you get back.
Granted, that's a 36.
Yeah, but a lot of even like your 45s and 50s would have had the same barrel diameter.
Right.
And the wood was always like 1/8 of an inch thick on the forend, whereas this thing is just, it's a beast. It's not swamp barreled or anything. It's just a big chunk. And the reason they did that was, of course, and that's where a lot of your accuracy comes from, is that big, heavy barrel. And I'll say to this day, a Hawken style rifle is probably the most accurate sidelock rifle out there. Anyway, Arizona Ghost Rider said Tom Tobin's pistol holster is funny looking.
Yeah. So that's a chunk of buffalo hide that has the tail hanging out the end. And I actually have a piece of buffalo hide at home that I was gonna do that and make it into a holster for the Patterson. I've just never done it. Yeah.
Let's get back up here. We were talking about Fort John about an hour ago, and I got you off topic.
Yeah, no worries. So Old Fort John gets started about 1842. So basically, Old Fort William, it was cottonwood log stockade. Cottonwood logs are great for like adobe buildings because you use a whole log to support the roof. When they're covered up, when they're not covered, they rot away pretty fast. Cottonwood's not really good for lumber. It's not really good for firewood. But like I said, it does okay in adobe style buildings. So Old Fort John was rotting out. Old Fort William is rotting away. And so the American Fur Company decides to build what will become known as Fort John, named after John Sarpy of the American Fur Company. So they built that in 1842. And of course, at that point, Buffalo robe trade's really getting going strong. Bent St. Vrain Company's, done about 15,000 buffalo robes that year. They did 15,000 buffalo robes the previous year. In 1842, you start seeing that success turn into disaster with some of the fur trading posts. So what happens is that these fur trading posts get such a demand for buffalo robes that they basically turn the buffalo robes into money for the natives. And so the natives start to hunt them more just for the hides. They start to put more pressure on the buffalo. And the closer, when you're around these fur trading posts, closer to the fur trading posts, the buffalo start to move further and further away to get away from that pressure. So what happens is down in Colorado, down from where I'm originally from, down around Bent's Fort area, the buffalo just kind of pick up and move east to Kansas. Up in the Dakotas, being the American Fur Company has so many trading posts along the Missouri River, the buffalo kind of move to the west and start moving into the area between the Black Hills of South Dakota and the Bighorn Mountains, Wyoming, into the Powder River country. Fort Laramie is kind of at that spot, or Fort John, I should say. It's kind of at that spot where the transition is going to affect them good with their trade to the north, but for their trade for the south, because they had a trading post down on South Platte, it's going to take a toll down there. It really doesn't, you don't see much of a great starvation winter out here at Fort John, not like what they had down at Bent's Fort. But it is enough that they do have a slight decline in the buffalo robe trade to the point that by 1849, Fort John ain't bringing in the amount of buffalo robes really needed to keep that place going. The immigrant trade is not bringing in quite enough to keep it going. Taking care of an adobe building this far north where it rains takes a lot of money. Shipping trade goods out to this location takes a lot of money. They have to ship it overland from Fort Pierre in South Dakota to Fort Laramie. It takes about a month and a half. And so they start thinking about getting away from it. In 1849, the Army decides it wants to purchase Old Fort John. They offer them $4,000, and American Fur Company says, have at it. And they sell out. Now, if they'd known the immigrant tide that was going to come through in 49, they might have hung on for a couple more years. Because that was a lot of people coming through. They could have made a lot of money on that. However, they sell out, but that doesn't end the trade because at Fort Laramie, you have the post-trader come in, or I should say post-settler, John Thomas Tutt, who's financially backed by a couple other prominent traders in the area that run trading posts. And that buffalo robe trade is going to continue there at Fort Laramie for quite a few more years.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm writing a message. Yeah, I'll just tell you, Stephen M., if you want to elaborate on that in the comments, go ahead. We'll read it.
Yeah. Yeah, have at it. That's kind of the generalized fur trade in a nutshell. But yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. And when you get into the more depth of it, especially in that buffalo robe trade, it gets really intricate. It's not the same as trading with the trappers by any means. These big companies, one of the reasons why they have a lot of overhead in the buffalo robe trade is it takes so many employees, because they're taking these employees that they're hiring to trade for them, sending them out to the Indian camps, wherever the Indians are camped at near the buffalo range, and they're doing the trading in the camps. And basically that's to create a monopoly, saying, all right, our trader's here, he's married into you, you don't let anybody else in. And so that takes a lot of overhead. It takes a lot of employees. At one point, Bent St. Vrain Company had 50 some odd people employed just to do trading with the Indians. That takes quite a bit of overhead when you're paying them $1 a day.
Yeah. You talked about, when I was at Fort Laramie, you talked about the woman coming in, the immigrant, talking about how that you couldn't get up to the bench to trade because there was 3 guys over here trading with trappers and then someone over here dealing with natives, and it was just crowded all the time.
Yeah, and that was a busy place, and that was at the post-trader store. So, yeah, you got Indians coming in to trade buffalo robes. You've got immigrants coming in to buy supplies. It was a happening place, especially when the Army takes over in 1849. You've got about 30,000 people come through in 49. You get about 60,000 through in 1850. For whatever reason, 51 has a real slack. And then in 1852, you get 60, 70,000 people. So, yeah, there was a lot of people going through that. So it was a happening place. But, yeah, after the 51 Fort Laramie Treaty, you see them do a really good year of about 12,000 buffalo robes sent out. They do another really good year in 1857 when Ward takes over, and about 9,000 buffalo robes go out. And the traders are paying $3 a robe to buy them from the Indians and turn around and just about doubling the money. The average is about $5. So you figure 12,000 robes at $5 a piece, that comes out to about $60,000 if my math is correct. Bringing that today's money, that's a multi-million-dollar business just in the buffalo robe trade.
I was just reading Santee's comment there. Guns of the West is in. Hey, fellas, hi. Santee said they opened up a Subway in the fort in 1858, but it never took off. Sad, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Go back up here. Angelica Wood said, hello, Angelica. Snapper had to go. Two Shots said, very nice sticks you got there. Thank you. Hardy Hat said, hello, you silly humans. MT Woods Runner. I was wondering when he was going to show up out here. I haven't seen you for a while. I'm glad to see you here. He said, I'm late to the party. Howdy from Montana, everyone. Well, hello to you too. I hope it's getting nice, cool weather up there probably right now. But anyway, there was one thing I was going to ask you. Let's go back a little bit. Describe in the best way you can, politely, a rendezvous.
Politely?
Without getting
Watch
too
the
crazy.
movie Mountain Men, the rendezvous scene. That's a pretty accurate depiction.
Yep. And that was later rendezvous, too.
Yeah. No, it was a sight of drinking and debauchery. That's the nice way of putting it.
You did a good job there.
Regular Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. We're talking about everybody coming in that hadn't seen anybody, but they're a few buddies for a year coming in with money and leaving with nothing.
Yeah. They'd often drink themselves out of money. Old Bill Williams, that kind of what leads to his demise. He got in with the Ute, and that's very uncommon for a white man to get in friendly with the Ute, but old Bill Williams managed to do it. So the Ute gave him a bunch of furs and asked him to take them down to Santa Fe and trade them on their behalf, and he agreed to it. He got down there to Santa Fe, sold their furs, and turned around and proceeded to go to the houses of ill repute and got drunk and didn't have any money to take back to them. They didn't have any money to buy the trade goods they wanted, which basically leads to them eventually killing him a few years later. But yeah, and old Bill Williams, it's worth noting, was a circuit preacher. He was a religious man. And even he was prone to that kind of behavior when the opportunity provided.
Evidently, he wasn't a Jedediah Smith type.
No. In fact, he grew up at Fort Osage and was a Methodist circuit preacher that rode around preaching the sermons, and then went out west and I guess left God behind at Fort Osage. But yeah, he was a rough customer, and they said in starving times you didn't want to be in front of him. You might get ate too.
Yeah, that's probably more common than a lot of people think. They just don't talk about it.
It actually happened quite a bit. There's another story of two mountain men, and I don't remember who the two were. But they had captured a couple of Indian women, and the one guy goes out hunting to see if he can find any food, and he comes back to camp, and the guy's cooking some meat, and he's like, "Oh, you found some meat, huh?" And he says, "Yeah, I was just kind of hanging around." And he goes around the corner, and here's one of the women, her body's still twitching on the ground, and he had cut her up and was eating her. So yeah, it was known to happen.
Yeah. I saw one up here. Dustin said, he's talking about the Subway. He said, but you do know that Quiznos pushed them out shortly thereafter. Gray Pilgrim. Hey, Gray Pilgrim. Good to see you here. Franklin Horse said, what happens at Rendezvous stays at Rendezvous. Sometimes. Yeah, your money
Oh,
stays.
boy.
He said, I wonder if there was, Hardy Hat said, I wonder if there was any modern made alcohol that replicates fur trade era hooch.
Yeah, $5 bottle vodka.
He said, I imagine watered down Everclear would be pretty close.
Yeah, I wouldn't even water it down. What was it? One guy said you take pour a little bit of brown liquor in a bottle, throw in a sack of chewing tobacco, a couple tumbleweeds, boil it till it turns real dark brown, water it down with a little water, and that's what you get whiskey for the area.
Yeah, I heard that. Guns of the West said that all this cannibal talk is making me hungry. Okay, Stephen M said, okay, just he's talking about, we're going to go here in a little bit, guys. We got a little bit more to talk about. If you got any comments, questions, throw in there. Duke still got something to talk about here, but I do want to read this Stephen M. He's talking about what would Ashley do. He said, okay, it's a cross between a Lehman Jaeger and a Hawken. Harper's Ferry, however, with a larger, robust military lock. I like it. Interchangeable 62 caliber rifles, 62 caliber barrels, one rifled, one smooth bore, no longer than 26 inches barrel for. I like it. That's a good idea. Interchangeable barrels, yeah. Why not? All in one gun, or just have two guns.
Yeah, Gray Pilgrim, because apparently I can see the comments here. Yeah, Gray Pilgrim. Yeah, it was Henry Fonda. That's the one I was thinking about. Indian whiskey.
Yep, Cheyenne Social Club. You know, Mom and Dad voted Republican or Democrat. Sorry. Freeze a pommel carry, also self-retaining wedge pins. Nothing worse than losing wedge pins in the wild. Yep.
Yeah, no kidding. But that's why rawhide was an essential to have in your saddlebag.
Go ahead. I mean, I know what you're going to say, but go ahead and elaborate.
Yeah, so rawhide basically is your 21st, or well, not your 21st, excuse me, your 19th, 18th century duct tape. Yeah, I mean, you see quite a few guns repaired with rawhide. So if your pins fall out of your barrel, well, get a piece of rawhide, soak it in water, cut it to where it'll fit together, flush, take out your sewing kit, sew it together or lace it together with some more wet rawhide, let it dry, and it'll shrink up, and it's just as good as wrapping it in duct tape.
Yep.
You see a lot of cracked stocks repaired like that. Barrels on. I've seen locks held on with rawhide. There's a couple of examples of that. You see wagon wheels repaired with rawhide. Make boats out of rawhide. They call them bull boats, although they usually used a green buffalo hide, and then once it was around the willow frame, let it dry. But still, it's the same principle, rawhide. Yeah, you make drums out of rawhide. You can make bags out of rawhide. They call it parfleche. Rawhide was kind of the essential.
Yep.
Make a knife sheath out of rawhide.
Somebody mentioned Seth Kinman up there. I believe it was his rifle they sold not too long ago at Rock Island auction. That's pretty good indicator of what was going on with firearms in the Mountain Man era, which he was even later. He was more of a bear hunter, as I recall. But he had a rifle that had been used in the War of 1812. It was a Pennsylvania rifle. It had been marked used in the War of 1812. He'd carried it through the later fur trade era as a flintlock rifle. In the 1840s, 50s, when he really started doing more bear hunting, he converted it to cap lock, and they sold that thing at Rock Island the other day, and that dude was nothing but rawhide front to back. I mean, it was busted and split, and things were missing. He had the trigger guard, I think, even held on in the back with a piece of rawhide. So that is very interesting you mentioned that.
Yep, rawhide, it's the essential.
Yep, and Stephen M. said rawhide's good, but not instantaneous. So let's talk about a few of these guys after the end of the fur trade era. You're talking fur trade's pretty well done by 1840. That's your last rendezvous. We know Bill Williams is down south, and he traps by himself for a while, right? And you talk about
Yeah,
his
and then
dad?
he winds up in 44, 45, no, 43. Excuse me, 43, and he winds up going up in the Oregon country trying to trap beaver again. Not very successful. He actually goes to Bent's Fort and purchases $300 worth of trade goods on credit, with that value to be paid back in beaver pelts within a year. And he doesn't manage to pay it off. He winds up dying owing the Bent St. Vrain Company about $250 worth of that debt, because he's going to get killed. I think at 47. It's been a few years since I read up on that. Anyway, yeah, he's going to get killed by the Ute. Kit Carson by the Mexican War. He'd been leading Fremont around for a while. He was kind of writing as a dispatch writer for Stephen Watts Kearny during the Mexican War. Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick, very prominent mountain man, came out in the early days. Like I said, was part of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company out at Fort William. That becomes Fort Laramie. He gets appointed in 1847 as the Indian agent for the Upper Platte and Arkansas River Agency. And so he's the one that's going to organize the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. And then he'll die a handful of years later. He also leads the first immigrants to Oregon in 1841, just 10 years prior to the Fort Laramie Treaty. So he's around. He's pretty prominent. Kit Carson will eventually become a colonel in the Army, fighting the Navajo. He also fights the Comanche on occasion, but he's really known for the Navajo Wars. Let's see here. Tom Tobin kind of goes to farming, then he gets fame because he brought in the Espinosas, which that's a topic in and of itself for another day. Jim Bridger, he starts running Fort Bridger over in the western side of Wyoming as a trading post for a number of years. Scouts for the Army. You see a lot of these mountain men start scouting for the Army in the 1850s and 60s. Traps wolves, runs a trading post, scouts for the Army, and eventually he goes blind and his family comes back, takes him back east before he dies. Jim Beckworth, one of the other mountain men, black mountain men that's known about. You can't really trust what he says and does because he tells a lot of tall tales and lies. But supposedly opens a big hotel out in California, starts a big road up there that becomes prominent, and I guess it's still used to this day. Then he winds up back out here in Colorado, scouts for the Army, goes with the soldiers to Sand Creek at the massacre, at which point he quits his job as scout for the Army. He winds getting back in with the Crow Indians up in Wyoming, and eventually dies of hypertension, supposedly. Of course, Jedediah Smith died pretty early on in 1833. On the way to Santa Fe, he was out looking for a water hole, never showed up. His partners figured he ran on to Santa Fe. Well, they got to Santa Fe, he wasn't there. Come across a couple of Comanchero traders in Santa Fe that were trying to sell his pistols, and his friends asked him where they got him at, and they said, well, we got him from the Comanches. So he apparently got killed by Comanches down there. Hugh Glass gets killed really early on up at Fort Union in North Dakota. Strawn St. Vrain, after his days as a trapper, he becomes a pretty prominent businessman in the Santa Fe trade, and he sticks around for quite a few years. William Bent, did a few years trapping. He becomes an Indian agent, continues to run his fur trading post operation, then a ranching operation in southeastern Colorado. And then him and Kit Carson died just about the same time. Mm-hmm. Kit Carson basically has a heart aneurysm. William Bent dies from pneumonia. Charles Bent, his older brother, who had been a trapper with Strawn St. Vrain before William had even come out west, he was killed in the Taos Revolt in January of 1847. But yeah, a lot of those guys just wound up going under, and a handful of them ended on a fairly happy note.
A lot of them, it's funny to see they stay out, even after the fur trade era.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just because they become either bullwhackers on the trail, or they're guides
Right.
for wagon trains, or buffalo hunters. And that it's funny to think that people like Jim Bridger, the fur trade or the trapper era for Jim Bridger was just a small portion of his life. You know?
Yeah, it wasn't very big. It was, like I said, kind of like that little mini gold rush, and it only lasted for about, really, it didn't even make quite 20 years. And Bridger was right there from the get-go of it, about 17 years old, and when he came out there, spent most of his life out there in the West. Osborne Russell, who leaves us that Journal of a Trapper, that's one of the greatest resources out there. He eventually goes to Oregon, becomes kind of a town marshal, so to speak, and then he winds up, ending as a prominent citizen, living out his life as a prominent citizen out there in Oregon.
Yeah. What happened to Tom Tobin in the end?
Tom Tobin's kind of got a quiet thing. He just kind of goes back to ranching and farming after the Espinosa brothers, and just kind of drifts off out of memory there, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, let's get to. Okay, go ahead. I want to read some comments.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, read the comments.
Guns of the West. Gray Pilgrim said he oversized wedge pen broke his 49 pocket model. Well, that's not good.
No, that's not very good at all.
Guns of the West. Dustin said, Santee, don't you have a shotgun that's held together with rawhide? I think I've seen that.
Yeah.
Gray Pilgrim said green buff hide would get pretty gamey.
Oh, that'd be a heck of a stinky ride. That's for no doubt.
Stephen M said, yes, rawhide good, but not instantaneous for fixing the wedge pin missing. That's why he said self-retaining pins. Yeah, got that in his what would Ashley do? That's a very interesting concept. What would Ashley do? That's an interesting concept. I like that he came up with that. Gray Pilgrim said, well, when you're sitting around a cabin in the winter, you got time. Okay, here's a good one.
That's true, too.
Here's a good one. And we already discussed this a little bit, but let's go into depth on it. Hardy Hat asked, so if Hawken guns came around at the close of the fur trade era, where did it get the reputation as the perfect mountain man gun? And we've already covered this a lot, but let's zero in on this because it's such a myth.
Think of it as the Rolls Royce of the mountain man guns.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wanted to get their hands on them, but there weren't a lot out there, and they were worth a lot of money. So that's kind of why they get the reputation. And in reality, that reputation is kind of overrated. Not in the quality of the guns. They were very good guns, but the reputation was just kind of. I think Hollywood got a hold of it and really blew it up there.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, all of those guns, even though the Hawken's the nicer gun, they all basically do the same thing rifle wise.
Yeah.
You've got your two categories. You got your smoothbores and your rifles. That would be the same as someone saying, you go out today to the store, you're going out to hunt ducks for, your family for the winter. You walk in the store and there's two shotguns on the shelf. One of them is a $500 Mossberg 500, and the other one is a $1,800 Benelli M4. Which one is 90% of everybody going to pick up? They're going to get the cheap one that does basically the exact same thing. The only difference is those Hawkens had such beautifully heavy barrel. I mean, you rest that dude on a tree, you can shoot. I mean, modern Hawkens will do it too. I love the Hawken, but it's a big, heavy, very expensive gun.
Yeah.
And like I said, guys, if you want to read more on the subject, it's the Hawken Rifle and its place in history by Charles E. Hanson Jr. You can order it. The best place I found to order it is from the Nebraska Museum of the Fur Trade. And he goes into extreme detail on, and most of the Hawkens that were there didn't look like the Hawkens we think of.
No.
late 1830s Hawken would have been a full stock. Okay, so let me go into this. I'm not. I'll give you a break here, but they did make guns as early as 1825, but they looked like Pennsylvania long rifles at that point.
Yep.
And they were very expensive, and they may have sent a few up with Ashley, but definitely not very many.
Right.
And like I said, if they're popular out west, they're popular east too. And St. Louis, they were sending just as many east as they were west. So, it's just it's a really good gun. It's legendary because of Jeremiah Johnson, but it's a little overblown.
Yep. And I think Jeremiah Johnson, that's really the first time you really see it get mentioned. And that's a problem with Hollywood is that, they mention something, make it seem all this cool thing, and then really wasn't all that prominent. Not saying anything that they weren't good guns. They were good guns. They just weren't that prominent.
Now, the real liver-eating Johnson did have a half-stock cap lock a Hawken, and it is in the museum, the Cody Museum up there. And it looks just like one of these trade guns, or not trade guns, sorry. It looks just like one of these Great Plains rifles. I mean, it looks just like one of these. The only thing is, it's pretty well confirmed now that people used to think he got to the mountains in the 1840s. It's pretty well confirmed now that the true John Garrison, liver-eating Johnson, did not even get to the mountains until the early 1860. Then he was there for a little bit, came down, fought in the Civil War, went back. And so in 1860, that gun would have definitely been, something you could have had. It would have been popular at that. But you got anything to add to that? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah. Like I said, most of the mountain men that are famed for having Hawkins, they didn't get Hawkins till long after the fact. Because I guarantee you, if Tom Tobin would have had the Hawken that he killed the Espinosas with back in the fur trade days, he probably would have got killed because that was a 30-pound or 28-pound gun. 30 pounds, not that far off. And that had slowed his horse down enough, they would have caught up to him, scalped him.
Yeah. And like we said, you got Kit Carson, I believe, had one. Jim Bridger, we know, had one.
Yep.
John Garrison had one. And Tom
all
Tobin
of them
had one.
Were after the fur trade era.
Yeah. And it became popular. Like I said, if you go on and check out another channel on that, guys, go check out Turkey Creek 1823. He does a Lehman rifle video that's pretty good on that subject right there. And he could use some subscribers anyway. But, yeah, he does some really good mountain man era stuff. Let's get over here. Hope we answered your question, Hardy Hat. Diane Houston said Bill should have just moved to Mexico and hid out.
Well, technically, he got killed in Mexico. If you're talking about old Bill Williams,
it was Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah.
He just didn't hide good enough. Everything Black Powder's in. Hey, you guys, tune in 2 weeks from tonight. I believe we're set up to have Everything Black Powder on the show in 2 weeks. Gray Pilgrim said, Duke, you're a wealth of info. Stephen M., can you talk a little bit about missionaries in 38, I believe, and the popularity of Narcissa Whitman?
Yeah, so that's at Old Fort William. She come through in 36. And they're really the ones that kind of set that trail for the Oregon Trail. But yeah, they come out to convert the Indians to Christianity, of course. Narcissa Whitman's with them. And I think that's when Father DeSmet first starts coming out west, if I remember right. I may be remembering wrong. Because DeSmet was out here for quite a few years. But yeah, they're kind of the first ones that come through. And then in 41, the Oregon Trail folks kind of following their tracks right on up there into the Oregon country.
Yeah.
But
they're more of an Oregon Trail. A lot of their story takes place more of an Oregon Trail, Gold Rush era.
Right. The thing of it is, they use, because she come through during Rendezvous era. So if you watch the Mountain Men, when they talk about having white women at the Rendezvous, I'm pretty sure that was Narcissa, and they depict it pretty well because she's sitting there saying hymns to them, and they're all just kind of sitting around the campfire. And for the Mountain Men, seeing a white woman out there in that country, that was a real treat. They're going to put their best foot forward for that.
Might be
Not so much for the native women, of course, but yeah. And I don't remember if it was Narcissa Whitman again or not later on, but there's another account in the 40s at Fort John that a white woman comes through and demands entry into Fort John, and the men won't let her in. She can't figure out why, and she finally talks them into letting them in and finds out it's out of sheer embarrassment because the place was just a trash dump and looked terrible. And she was pretty offended by the fact that, they didn't clean up after themselves.
Yeah. I'll go into just one more thing, guys. The Mountain Man movie, we're talking about the Charlton Heston movie, Mountain Man. The one thing in that movie that gets me every time is the realism is where Brian Keith's sitting there talking his ear off during the fight right next to him, and he shoots that flintlock off, and that blast comes out of that pan, just hits Brian Keith right in the face. And you can tell that wasn't planned. And they left it in, but it's so authentic that I'm sitting here going, wow, that's good stuff. You wouldn't set that close to somebody that's about to shoot a flintlock right there in your face.
And, there's probably a few extra curse words in there than they probably would have used back in the day, but that movie and the feel of it is pretty accurate. Now, for the clothing-wise, gun-wise, some of the guns aren't right. Clothing-wise, it's Hollywood. But the overall feel of the movie, probably pretty close.
Yeah. And I've actually got a story about that, about the guns that especially Charlton Heston was using and Brian Keith, because they didn't put a lot of money into their extras, mostly just reenactors they had come out and do it. And I can't remember where I was reading it. One reenactor was talking about Charlton Heston, Brian Keith were so hard on those horses that they were breaking replica guns left and right, falling off them horses, and in the stuntmen and everything else. So at one point, Charlton Heston or Brian Keith, one of them walked over there and picked up his rifle and asked if he could use it. He said, I snatched that rifle back and said, nope, not in this lifetime.
Yeah.
So they're not going to give them the best historically accurate rifle if it's just going to get tore up in a stunt scene.
Right. Yeah, because in Jeremiah Johnson, he whacks at one Indian, breaks a stock, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they was going through those replicas pretty often. But Charlton Heston, I think that flintlock, that one was pretty close, accurate reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the most accurate gun out of the whole thing. Besides, I think a couple of natives actually had some pretty decent military surplus old style muskets, and then that one guy has that double barrel shotgun.
Mm-hmm. Brian Keith.
No, not Brian Keith. The young guy that Brian Keith's bringing out.
Oh yeah. The
ice merchant.
Yeah. The guy that's bringing all the
you can't get ice over the mountains. Wagons, how you gonna get immigrants?
I love that. Stephen M said the Rendezvous story of Joe Meek.
Oh God, that's been a few years. I don't remember that one. Oh God, that has been a long time since I read that book.
Maybe you ought to just make your own video on it.
One of these days, I'm going to get started doing the history stuff. One of these days, I ain't going to guarantee when, but one of these, I got to get a new laptop first because my laptop's sitting over here with a dead screen. So,
Franklin Horse said John Coulter died of jaundice.
Yeah, I know he died pretty young. He died in his 40s.
Yeah. Greg Pilgrim said he has a 32 rimfire Frank Wesson with a repaired stock. Like, I think he meant with the rawhide stuff, maybe. Greg Pilgrim, Jeremiah Johnson. Gina Woods said, I finally arrived. Mama Woods made it before y'all got over. Canning dill relish. Been listening from the kitchen. She's listening to you, Duke.
Well, I better not quote Mountain Man too heavy then. I told you there's black feet hereabouts. Go.
Greg Pilgrim said, I have a Hawken. Yeah, you can see a Hawken again here pretty soon on our channel. Franklin Horse said, Gina is making me hungry. Greg Pilgrim said, they are a wealth of movies on the fur trade, Mountain Men and similar. Yeah, I just watched one the other day that had really good guns. Was Kirk Douglas in Big Sky, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And I started watching it because we found a replica that was used in the movie. and we were
Right.
thinking about buying it, but we did not get it bought. But
If you want to watch crappy movies on the fur trade, watch that one with what's his name? Played Dumbledore. The first time around. God, I can't think of his name. He played the main character in A Man Called Horse.
Richard Burton.
No, it's not Richard Burton. He also played Cromwell.
Richard
He
Burton.
played the Duke of Death and
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Richard Burton, but I'll check it.
No, I don't think it's Richard Burton. It's Richard something. God.
Richard Harris.
Richard Harris, that's the one.
Richard Burton.
If you want to watch a really crappy movie, there's a Mountain Man movie that he's in. I can't even remember the title of it, but he plays a character called Zach Bass. It very well parallels Hugh Glass.
Man of the West. I think
Something like that. Or Man in the West.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're moving this friggin' keelboat on wagon axles across country when he gets mauled by the bear. And then they got flintlocks. Well, supposedly flintlocks. They're actually trapdoor Springfields that have been converted to look like a flintlock. But yeah, he just takes this. There's this one scene where he takes a bullet out of his pouch. It's a lead ball, puts it in his mouth, spits on it, and shoves it in the barrel, and then stamps the muzzle loader on the ground to seat it. And I was like, what the heck do you have a ramrod for if it's that easy to load?
Man in the Wilderness.
Man in the Wilderness. That's it. Yes.
Oh, I'm getting behind on the comments here.
That's a terrible movie.
There was a Trader movie with Charlton Heston. Forgot the name. I just recalled in the Heston movie he was arguing with the other trapper over which tribe was tracked. Yeah, that's Mountain Man.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about. Okay, yeah, but that was okay. I see what you're saying. That was a ways back before we got to this. Okay. Olivia Wood said hello, guys. If I miss you, I'm sorry. I'm skipping through here. Stephen N said for many natives, Narcissa was the first white woman they had ever seen. Can't remember the other woman's name, and it was at the rendezvous.
Yeah.
Gray Pilgrim has written it again. Duke needs to write the book.
One of these days.
Yep. We need to start a GoFundMe. Yes, that was Frank Wesson, was repaired with rawhide and metal plate. Gina Wood said, Duke, better behave yourself. Gray Pilgrim said, Richard Harris. Yeah, that's who we were talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, Stephen M. said they tried to pack a boat over land. He said, Gray Pilgrim said, I saw that a long time ago, and yeah, it was a turkey. Constitutional Carpenter said, yes, Duke should definitely write a few books.
One of these days.
He's got a lot to do, but maybe he'll have a little more time this winter. Maybe he can start.
Oh, God, that's going to be a long project. Our book's
going to be the median, though, in 10 years, or is it just going to be people going looking for 4-hour-long live chats?
I don't know, but I tell you what, I used to write kind of fiction stuff when I was younger. And I used to write a lot when I was younger. Kind of got out of it, and I went to try to start writing the other day, and I was like, I've got such a bad case of writer's block I can't break. It's not even funny.
Yeah. Hardy had asked, did mountain men really have beards? Seems like most photos have them clean shaven, or was that just while in town?
They you see them referencing having a lot of mustaches. There's pretty good records of them being shaved and just a mustache. If you look at the Alfred Jacob Miller paintings, most of those guys are pretty well clean shaven. There were probably a handful that did have beards. But it's kind of at that time point where beards were kind of, I wouldn't say exactly frowned upon, but they weren't considered,
societal.
yeah, I guess that's the way I'm trying to put it. Yeah. And you see, shaving razors on some trade ledgers. So yeah, you had a shaving razor, you'd shave. That being said, there's also a handful of trappers that were well known to have full beards.
Well, anybody that's had a full beard and then tried to shave it in January knows why you should have a full beard if you're up there. It's cold.
Yeah.
It does provide warmth. But I shaved this beard last September 20th of last year. It's not quite a full year's growth on my beard. So I can imagine a guy that was out for a year, he might break his razor or lose it or just quit caring. Yeah, he probably looked about like this when he came in and get a shave.
Yeah, I think I trimmed mine up. Well, I shaved mine back last November, and then I had it trimmed about the 4th of July. So, yeah, it's kind of going wild again. I need to go in and shave the sides off here again. But, yeah, I basically, the only reason I trimmed mine up is because I've been playing cavalry captain out at the fort. So it's like, yeah, I got to look a little nice. But Bings we may be doing a fur trade event next year. I think I'm just going to let my hair go wild again, let the beard go wild for a little bit. I may be trying to set up a Rishaw impression, Jean Baptiste Rishaw, at that event out here. We'll see how it plays out.
Is that Big Bat or Little Bat?
No, Jean Baptiste Rishaw was long before Big Bat and Little Bat come out. Jean Baptiste was a whiskey peddler and smuggler.
You could play that role.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, because so if everything plays out right, they talking about doing a fur trade encampment. I don't know if it's going to play out or not. I really don't. But if it does, yeah, I'm going to try to set up a Rishaw impression. Might have to try to learn French over the winter. But, yeah, because Rishaw, he spent a lot of time out in this part of the country, and he was not a nice guy to deal with. There's some said that he would rather cut your throat than look at you. And then he was known for random acts of kindness. Some guy come out west here and didn't know what he was doing, and Rishaw kind of showed him the ropes and sent him on his way. But, yeah, and his sons, holy crap, you want to talk about some real pains in the butts. His oldest, Junior, John Rishaw Jr., married 6 or 7 times in a period of less than that many years. And I think he had most of those wives at the same time. Went to tried to kill one guy because the one guy, I think it was his father-in-law or brother-in-law or something, or uncle-in-law. Anyway, had aggravated him, said something about his wife he didn't like. When he finally gets killed in 1872, he goes to one of the native villages that was of his family because he was half-breed. And he was in Chief Yellow Bear's lodge, and they was having a dance, and I guess one of his wives was dancing with Yellow Bear or something to that effect. And anyway, he got ready to leave, and he turned around and killed Yellow Bear with his brand new Winchester. Went outside to find out that Peter Janice, who was another half-breed that spent a lot of time out here, had taken off with the horses. And so Rishaw Jr. gets killed. And then his younger brothers go down and track down the Janice, Peter Janice and his younger brother, and they kill him just a few days later. So, yeah, the Rishaws were not very nice guys.
And that's who you're going to play.
Yeah, somebody that wasn't a very nice guy.
I was going to ask you about that, back onto this mountain man thing. Okay, so let's just get into this, because we need to do a whole video someday just on interpretation of history. But would you consider yourself a reenactor, a living historian, or a historical interpreter?
Living historian and historical interpreter.
When did the historical interpreter thing come out? Because I spend my life going around these historic sites, and I haven't started really hearing historical interpreter until recently.
Yeah, it's kind of a newer term, but it's basically living historian. Historical interpreter is kind of just the the new nomenclature for living historian.
So let me see if I got this right. Reenactors, guys like me, not always 100% correct, in the background of a show or something,
Right.
Not really living it. Living historian is more like a first-person interpretation.
Yeah, you could put it that way. Yeah.
Historical interpreter is more of the guy who teaches the crowd from a third-person perspective.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be a great way to categorize it. Basically, the reenactor is there for the reenactment's sake.
Mm-hmm.
The living historian is there for the education's sake, and the historical interpreter is there for the education of the public's sake. So the living historian and the historical interpreter can overlap. But the reenactors they're just kind of there to play whatever they're doing. Yeah.
That's like what I do. I mean, I go into some of these shows and I'm not, 100%, and I'm not talking to anybody. I'm in the background. I'd like to move up someday to do some other stuff.
You can be all three.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to be all three. But yeah, reenactors are more there for the reenactment's sake.
Do you like doing third person or first person better? What's your favorite?
I don't mind doing first person if I've had enough time to prepare for it. A lot of times I do it in third person, and that's just because where I'm at, it's hard to do it in first person because it's such a wide time frame. Mm-hmm. And also it's hard to do it because it's more of a museum setting than really set up for living history, which I could change real easy. But yeah, when I was down at Bent's, I did first person a lot, but I spent a lot of years down there. I had a lot of time to research and kind of get that going. It takes a lot of research to be able to do that. You got to know what's going on in the area. And even I didn't do it that well. But it can be done. And once you get comfortable doing it, just kind of think of it as you're living in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
You're playing a character and, kind of run with it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I know, they use their own history to develop their character.
Mm-hmm. What was your character? Because I know you played a Scotsman for a while. Was that only one of a few, or was that you were a Scotsman, mountain man, trapper? That fits in with this kind of.
Yeah. Really? I tried doing the Scottish thing, and then, they told me I couldn't do any of that because I wasn't from Scotland and I might offend somebody.
But you're you're a Frazier, for crying out loud.
I know I'm a Frazier. My family comes from Scotland. They came over here in 1763 because they got kicked out for being Protestants. But I did that down at Benson. Yeah, they told me I couldn't do it no more.
That's funny.
Because they said, well, we can't really prove there was a Scotsman down here. And I said, you had an Irishman. And I won't repeat his first name that the Indians called him because I know your mom's watching. But they had an Irishman down there at the fort. They had a couple other guys. Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick was an Irishman in and out of there. Why wouldn't there be a Scotsman?
Yep, I'm sure there would be. I'm surprised you didn't pull up a French because I know that's very popular, especially guys coming down from Canada.
Oh, I tried to do that, and then I talked in such a good French accent. Some French people come into the fort that one day and started talking to me in French, and I couldn't speak it back, and they kind of got offended.
Okay. So did you have a named character when you were reenacting? Or
no, I never come up with a name for it, no.
So you've never taken that step. I'd love to see you take that step. I'd love to see that. I realize it's like method acting to the max when you get to that point.
Right.
You've got to live the part when you get to that point.
I know there's some that do that, but the way I see it is half the time I can't remember my given name. Why would I try to come up with another one?
Oh, yeah.
And Duke ain't my given name either, so I've already taken on one nickname. I don't need any more.
Oh, so I'm going to go up here and read a few of these. We have quite a few in here, guys. We're getting ready to wrap this up. American Man. Hey, American Man, don't think I've seen you comment here. Welcome. He said the Indians thought the beards on a white man were bad medicine. Have you heard that, Duke?
Yeah, in the movie Mountain Men that I just watched last night.
Oh, whoa, about knocked her rifle over. Be sad if I knock that Kibler over. Guys, we were talking about the Hawkens and how most of them today aren't even really close to the historical one. I'm just waiting for Jim Kibler he's talking about putting out a Hawken kit. I think that would be awesome because it'll be really close to the historical Hawken. Last time I had a full beard, Gray Pilgrim said, I was working on a fire line in New Mexico. I had to jump through the flames to get to safety. Burnt hair. It stinks. Yeah, I know how that is. I've been in a few fires that cost me my beard.
Yep. I had an acetylene torch back blast in my face and cost me a beard.
I'd rather lose the beard than the eyebrows, though. Commentator talking about your book, he said, Duke, start an outline.
Yeah, I got an outline. I got a couple outlines written, but I can't get past that.
Yeah. Gray Pilgrim said that was back when I had hair. Gina Wood said Garrett was a volunteer fireman. Yeah, he has had a charred face before. Yeah, once or twice. Gray Pilgrim said he got drafted to fight a forest fire in northern New Mexico in the mountains. We held that thing on the ridge, and I was proud. So, you are proud when you've held one for 3 or 4 days, and we'll talk about that someday on here. But there have been some big ones that we thought we had held and then didn't, and then burned a third of the state down. Gina Wood said, "Great." Well, she's going to talk about it. Great job fighting the fire. We had an Anderson Creek fire that burned most of our county. Pretty crazy stuff out there here in the Kansas hills and prairies, the cedars that explode. But anyway, getting on into what we were talking about. Stephen M. said, in my day, it was thought of as first or third person. I believe we talked about that. Reenacting.
Yep. Yeah. First and third person living history. Yeah. Because that's one thing that they tried to drill in our heads down there at Bent's Fort is we were not reenactors. We were living historians. We were not reenacting a specific event. We were portraying what might have happened on any given day at a specific place. Yeah. So reenactors fight battles. Living historians just portray day-to-day life.
Franklin Horst said, I'm a historical interpreter, just not in the Old West or Mountain Man venues yet. Well, that'd be interesting if you might have already written it down, but tell us what you do, because, man, I love it all. I spent the last week back in East Tennessee going through some of those sites from the 1790s all the way up to 1900, and, man, there's some good stuff back there. I really enjoyed that. I enjoy it all.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to be comfortable doing anything like pre-revolution, because the idea of wearing buckle shoes and knee-high knickers and knee breeches just don't appeal to me.
Well, there's full-length pants. There were. It's not in town, but a lot of guys out, the long hunters had full-length breeches. But that's Hardy Hat said, as a former Civil War reenactor, I didn't really like doing first person as I'm not that knowledgeable. However, I found I could just say, I don't know, and I'm not a general. There you go. That's a good way to get around it.
There you go. I'm going to have to remember that.
We talked about that before, how and I think you and me talked about it, how in historical reenacting, a lot of times when people ask you a question about what's going on in the world at the time, you're not going to know because you don't got a newspaper out there.
Nope. 3 months from the nearest newspaper. That's one thing, we'd always have, anytime we did a big event down there at Bent's, we'd always have a sit down and kind of say, okay, this is what's going on. This is what you know. This is what you don't know. Kind of deal. And did as best as we could. But the first one I did that was all first person was the Fur Trade Symposium of 2015. I had worked at Bent's for 2 summers and thought I knew enough to get by. And within the first day, I realized I didn't know, I about said a bad word there, but I didn't know snot from Shinola. By about day 3, I was learning a lot. But yeah, there was some guys, they were kind of disappointed in my performance, but by the end of it, they said, yeah, you just need a little bit more experience and a little bit more research. And, within a couple more years, I was doing first person pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Gray Pilgrim had one for you there. He had Duke's 2 parts scotch, 1 part soda.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Gray Pilgrim said, my Hawken is a Spanish fake. Well, most of them are fakes today. like I said, if you get a Great Plains rifle, you're getting pretty close. But if you dig into them, especially the old Invest arms, you'll find they got that coil spring lock. It's not quite historical. They look good on the outside. And
you can go to Track the Wolf and fix that.
Yeah, and I might have to, but we got a couple Hawken videos coming out here in the next few weeks anyway. Still great deer hunting guns, especially I don't put anybody down that gets a modern Hawken with even like a tradition. Man, those things just shoot. I don't know what it is, but they just shoot, and they're great guns. And that's how everybody starts.
And I mean, if you're just buying it just for a muzzleloader to shoot, not really for historical reenactment, go for it. Yeah, them Thompson Centers will do the job. If you want something you want to use for living history, well, then you better buy the Lyman because that's closer, but you're better off spending the big bucks and getting a Layman kit or a Northwest Trade gun and going from there.
If you have a modern traditions Hawken, the thing is they're calling it the Hawken because that's the name that sells. But historically, a brass-plated, half-stock gun, cap lock in 50, 45, 50 caliber would be historically accurate for somewhere like Pennsylvania in 1850.
Yeah.
Kentucky, that gun was out there. It's just not what they slapped the Hawken name on it. But really, it's just a good common Pennsylvania, Kentucky style rifle for the era, of the 1860s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even later sometimes. I was just out at Sergeant York's place, Alvin C. York. That dude was carrying and proficiently using a half-stock percussion rifle in 1915, and that's what everybody had. It's just you could tailor your load. They knew the gun. The stuff was cheap. That they were using them for a long, long time. So I've got nothing against the modern replicas. Just they're really hard to shove them into a 1925 or 1825, Mountain Man era where they don't belong to the most extent. All right, guys, we've been going for 2 hours and 26 minutes. We're going to run here for 4 more minutes and shut it down. I'm going to get to the rest of you guys' comments. Gray Pilgrim, I think I read all that. Franklin Horst said Pennsylvania German history, 18th and 19th century at Gorshofen Folk Festival. And I can't read even the name of that town in Pennsylvania, but yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I love that stuff. Can you read that, Duke?
Perkio Minville and
Goshhofen. Goshhofen. Yeah, there you go.
Goshhofen.
Yeah. I'm reading down through here.
Don't know what that means, but I'm pretty sure it's German.
Yeah. So Hardy Hat said, so at what point did the cap lock really replace the flintlock in everyday life? I assume caps are a pain to have to pack into the sticks. Go ahead, Duke, and then I'll tell you.
By the late 1840s and certainly by the 1850s, the cap locks had pretty well dominated at that point.
Yeah. They took over.
You still see the flintlock Northwest Trade guns being traded to the Indians at that point, but yeah, cap locks are really dominating most of it.
Something I found really interesting is doing a little Civil War history not too long ago. The Missouri guerrillas at Osceola and some of those first fights predominantly armed with flintlocks.
Yeah.
Some units armed with flintlocks in the Civil War. But it's phasing out. You get in. The thing is, the flintlock really only lasts. I mean, the cap lock, as far as the gun to have, really only lasts, especially in military, for about 20, 30 years. From about 41 to 63. That's the last, I believe the last adopted gun was a muzzle-loading cap lock was in 1863, and that was the Remington Zouave style rifle. And so you're talking about 20 years of military. Lasted a long, long time as far as civilian use, but the last flintlock that the Northwest Trade gun that Hudson Bay Company sold as a flintlock was in 1883, I believe. So that lasted a long time. Flintlock, and people kept those up until the 1900s, because they worked.
Right.
So there's a little crossover there, but like Duke said, I think Civil War era and on is pretty good for cap lock, up to about 1920, really, in a lot of places.
Yeah.
For civilians, anyway. Okay, we're about done here, guys. We got about a minute to go. I'm going to read the rest of these real quick, and then we'll be done. Constitutional Carpenter said, this has been an amazing stream. Well, thank you. And Gray Pilgrim said, thank you, fellas. Yep. Caps are hard to find today. That's true, Gray Pilgrim. That's why Flintlocks hung on so long. Thank the Reverend Forsyth. Yeah. Constitutional Carpenter, I don't know why they took over, but my heirloom black powder was a flintlock converted to a percussion and used up to the 1930s in Mississippi shooting squirrels. Exactly. Those old muzzleloader guns went a long time, a lot longer than people give them credit for.
Yep.
All right. Well, guys, I believe we're going to shut her down now. Duke, you got any videos coming out anytime soon?
Oh, see, we did the C96. I think the PA08 Luger video is coming out next week.
Okay, that'd be good to
And
see.
then I gotta upload the 4 3/4 inch U-Bird or Cimarron and that Little Thunder Cimarron, and I think that's the last one I got that's edited.
Yeah. And then we got a couple modern rifle videos, but we don't know where they're going to come out at. So,
Yeah, I've either gotta edit them. Well, I don't know if I'm gonna do any more editing on this computer because I fried it, but I can still upload on it, so we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, don't drop your laptop on the screen. It doesn't do good things.
Well, anyway, guys, if you guys hang out here tomorrow morning at 7:30 on 11 Bang Bang, we will be visiting the Traditions Renegade Hawken rifle, which actually fits in with what we're doing right now. And there's that's a pretty good video. You'll see some pretty cool stuff happen with that rifle. But anyway, you got anything else to say, Duke?
Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you very much for coming on here and giving us
You bet
3 hours of your time again. All right, guys. Tune in 2 weeks from now. I believe we have the Everything Black Powder channel going to be on here, and maybe Duke if he wants to come on, and Snapper too, I think. So, as always, trust in God. Keep your powder dry. Bye.